get down to today's business, just a brief explanation. I've been away from the chair on urgent matters of national importance. The House may know that I sit on the COVID committee, and current situation that the country faces, the committee has been meeting to deliberate urgently, and that has taken me away from the chair. But I have been ably represented by the Deputy President, who from all reports and from my own quiet observations has done a fantastic job, and I wish to thank him. Just to say again that I may have to leave the chair again sometime around 11, as the committee is expected to be meeting with the Prime Minister. So just please take note of this development. And I thank you for your indulgence, members. Yes. Thank you. Clerk, brief me where we are now. I think we have the mover of the motion plus two other persons to speak. Yes. Huh? Oh, Senator. Senator, the Honorable Chris Diali, the floor is now yours, and you are a presiding officer, so you are conversant with the rules, so there's no need to give you
Thank you, Mr. President.
a reminder or a refresher. And from my observation, you are not affected mentally by any diseases related to the age question as far as mental capacity is concerned. So the reminders are not necessary in respect of the rules. The floor is yours, Senator.
Thank you again, Mr. President, and good morning to fellow senators and colleagues. Mr. President, as I rise to give my comments on the budget, I want to first of all start off by welcoming my good friend, Senator Roland Bolo, on the other side. And the evidence would have shown yesterday, Mr. President, in his debate and his response to the revenues and expenditure for 2021, we can all understand the measure of contribution he's going to make to this Honorable House as we move forward. We very much appreciate, I did very much appreciate what he did yesterday and how he did it. And it speaks to the quality of the gentleman that has just joined us in this upper house. So, Brother Bola, welcome on all fronts, from my side in particular. Mr. President, I want to start off this morning about budget, the theme, and what it is. You know, generally we all understand what a budget is. It is normally our best estimates of what the expectation is going to be in a future period. And best expectations meaning how we think we could spend the monies that we think we're going to collect. And it is very much an estimate. We call it, I don't want to use the word guesstimate because it is a guesstimate, but we use certain parameters to understand how to arrive at figures. We use historical data and so on and so forth and current trends. But I raise that in the sense that in this particular environment that we're in, this COVID environment, it is even more uncertain as to how we estimate and the accuracy of our estimates going forward. So, President, none of us can deny that this is a very unique time. We exist in an environment that is very fluid and can change instantly, as we have just noticed with our particular cluster situation in that premises in the South, and how it can impact our economy in general and the lives of our people in general. We have seen since March of this year the level of unemployment, collapse of sectors, poverty situation, and the public health challenges that we have all come to see with a pandemic. I never thought I would have experienced what is a pandemic. None of us in business would have catered for the word pandemic. All of us would have catered for issues of disaster after a hurricane or a natural disaster of some sort. You know, you talk about bomb threats, you talk about issues that would affect, but never and ever in all of our emergency preparations did we have a pandemic, because the last pandemic was in, I think, 1917 with the Spanish flu issue, so none of us expected that. So it is a very new environment for us to operate in, and so too for governments. I don't think any nation in this world expected this little virus to put all of us at our knees, both economically and otherwise. And the answer for this and what we can do as we move forward, none of us really knows for sure how to answer it. And I come to a quote just recently that was said by a very good friend of mine, which I like so much. And he said, the only thing we can be certain about going forward, especially in 2021, is uncertainty. I want to repeat that. The only thing we can be certain about is uncertainty. And I think that aptly describes the environment that we're going to be heading in for 2021. It is never going to be a situation where it's going to be business as usual. I am certain, Mr. President, that when you look at a theme that speaks to recovery, transformation, and resilience, there is a good aspects of that in the sense that in this new environment that we're going to be facing with all this uncertainty, we have to prepare ourselves to change what we're doing, and this is where the transformation comes in. But we have to also be able to provide hope to the people that we're speaking to, and the government has a serious role in that to play. And I believe that the provision of hope is a critical thing, because COVID has not only affected us economically, by loss of jobs and business and so on going on there, but psychologically as well. So we need to prepare to give people some sense. It will get better, and we hear about the vaccine coming and some of the challenges that will come with that, but it does provide some level of hope for us as we move forward. And I believe this budget, and when we prepare a budget and we talk about estimates of how we plan to use the monies that hopefully we will collect, because it's still hopefully, because we're not sure yet on how this will pan out, that it must provide some level of hope to the people. So the budget, when we present, and we present in the lower and the upper houses, is not only to talk about the figures and our plans and our hopes, where we want to do it with these monies, it is also about to talk directly to our people to say, listen, we expect certain things to happen or may not happen. And as a result, we need to prepare you, both psychologically and otherwise, to deal with the issues coming forward. We know the understanding of government having to do this legally so that the government departments can get the authority to spend. And we have no issues with that. Some general comments on overall on the budget, Mr. President, in that this is the first time in probably the last 5 or more years we have seen the government presenting a deficit budget. And that is significant, because when you think about all the other countries who have had the opportunity to present budgets so far, most of them, if not all of them, have presented deficit budgets. It is speaking to the times. It is speaking to uncertainties in revenues, and it is speaking to the fact that we have certain costs, fixed costs in particular, that all governments and all nations have to meet. Public sector wages is one, and I'm going to come to that a little later. The fact that this budget is linking what they're saying to the 2025 National Sustainable Development Plan, to me, is important, because it is now saying to us that, listen, we're working strategically with a plan that we have prepared for 2035, and we want to start to link our current budgets and budgets going forward to this plan so that we can keep on focus, because that is important. A budget is not only about a plan for the figures and what we intend to achieve within a 1-year frame, we must also frame it in a 2 or 3 year cycle so that we can check to see if what we're presenting and how we're using what we say we want to use is in harmony with what we have said strategically set for ourselves over the next 3 to 5 years in the first instance and beyond. So I believe that is a plausible thing, and I congratulate the government for linking it to the 2035 plan. Mr. President, the issue of the government and what they have done with this plan needs to be commended from the point of view that it is never easy to prepare any sort of figures and propose any sort of plan with the level of uncertainty that we face. Because as the framers of this particular budget will have to be challenged, the issue of are we going too far this way or are we going too far the other way, and how much can we go here or not here? I mean, we just finished preparing budgets in my business, and it was a challenge. It was a significant challenge because you just cannot estimate properly, and you can't use much historical information. So for some of us who are preparing budgets, we have not used 2020 figures as a measure to compare to, which is the normal thing that we will do. All of us are going back to 2019, 2018, and the further back you go with the historical nature of these figures, the more uncertain it becomes, but you have to have a base. So I just say to the technocrats on the other side and the government on the other side that I think we have to applaud the effort. It is never an easy thing to do. We must applaud the fact that when the crisis started for us in March of this year, the government was able to provide support to various groups that had significant dropout, tourism sector in particular, provide provision of $10 million in unemployment benefits through NIS, of course, and the suspension of some NIS payments, the provision of some Grenlec electricity power supply support. So we saw a government coming forward to help, and we must commend the government on these areas. Because as I said, none of us understand what this pandemic would have brought onto us. None of us understood in particular how we needed to react, but we know for sure that some level of reaction was required, and that was done, and we applaud the government for the moves that they have made in this area. No government in this region, particularly OECS, is not going to use and identify the sectors that we have identified to help in the short term and to a lesser extent the medium. Most governments who have prepared budgets are highlighting construction, are highlighting agriculture, in particular in the OECS, and retail sectors, and to some degree education services. Most of our economies in the OECS, as you know, Mr. President, are all very similar and all linked. All of us are heavily dependent on tourism. All of us are heavily dependent to some degree on agriculture and retail sectors. In recent times, education services have become a major player. Grenada in all of our OECS territories can boast of being the most diversified economy in terms of its sectoral revenue and how it receives it. But nonetheless, what this pandemic has showed, when we had the 2008 crisis, financial crisis, education services were shown to be very robust and stood up to that crisis, and we benefited as a country. In this particular pandemic situation, that is not the case. The only area for us in terms of diversification that stood up in this pandemic was the CBI. And I will come to that in another while. That is the only one, and that is testament to our level of diversification. And all the OECS countries that have programs can tell you that CBI is the only thing that withstood the vagaries of this pandemic and how it infiltrated the various sectors. So when the government is proposing in this budget to use agriculture, construction, and retail to push their revenue and the revenue streams, I applaud that in the sense that I don't think they have much choice. That is the way they have to go. I will come and talk about construction and my feelings on that and where I think we are going to go, and a lot have been said already on that, and agriculture. The fact that we expect tourism and education services to recover slowly, again, is good thoughts on that, because all indications from all international markets where we depend heavily for tourist arrivals are showing that tourism would not come back to its full pre-COVID state until probably 2024. That could be a daunting task for that sector, and the support that we have to give that sector in the time. Educational services a little earlier than that, but certainly tourism, because it is just a reality of life that even though our destinations may be ready and protocol and have the relevant COVID protocols to accept certain guests, the international markets through their own market and their response to COVID, as well as the fact that the airlines are not able to travel, and those that exist and survive the COVID crisis financially, how much of them are going to be around in the volume to carry guests is another discussion that will come up. But the hope around the corner is a vaccine. And if the vaccine can come in a timely manner that could encourage people to travel, that will be a good thing. But in all of this, Mr. President, the most important thing for me is confidence. And confidence for the tourists, the prospective tourists to come to our destination. Confidence for attract foreign direct investment. And I'm going to again come back to that under the discussion I want to have on CBI. But really and truly, the aspect to develop confidence both in our locals and the foreign person to service our economy is going to be an important thing. And the budget, I believe, must address that, and to some degree have addressed that, even though it may have areas of weaknesses that we need to raise. I want to spend a little time, Mr. President, on CBI, and of course, I want to spend a little time on Marketing Board, because I note from the discussion so far, those two particular institutions came in for some discussion, and being where I sit on these two organizations, I thought it relevant to spend a few minutes on them and to talk about them. I want to start with the CBI program. And before I start and talk about the program, I want to talk about the staff at CBI and to compliment, and as we say in local parlance, big them up. Because, you know, this is a group of young people and really dedicated people that when the crisis and the lockdown started in March, we deployed them with laptop units, and that staff of CBI continued to work through the entire crisis with all the issues that we were facing, both insecurities, about food, and all the things that was happening in the lockdown, and continued to process files of potential applicants under the program. And I must compliment them and give them a big hooray. When we talk about our people and work ethic. Yes. So, Mr. President, as I mentioned before, the program has been one of the few bright spots in this particular crisis and have been very resilient. We have been able in the CBI unit to process a number of files during this period, and everything was done. We have been able to get monies into the National Transformation Fund that will assist government with infrastructural development and putting aside monies for contingency issues, which would have been used to support some of the spend that we had to do when we had all these programs to help in the various sectors that were collapsing. And when you compare what CBI has done to the other sectors, the main sectors like tourism and agriculture, you could understand that we have to say, thank God we had a CBI program that could have helped us through this particular period. The program continues to sell very well under its two sections, primarily Section 10 and Section 11. Section 10 is for monies coming into the National Transformation Fund, and Section 11 is for investments coming for the accommodation sector and the various other sectors identified by the government as it relates to projects that could be undertaken under CBI projects. One of the things that we need to say with the program continues to be one of the best run programs in this region. It's still the golden standard program. We just recently had a very good migration roundtable, which was led by the CBI unit and co-sponsored by the Cooperative Bank, where we examine all the areas of strengths and weaknesses and how we could better frame the program to attract high investment and net worth individuals. And I want to spend a little time on that because in this time of COVID and the environment internationally, foreign direct investments have been depleting over the years and have gotten more difficult to attract. And our destination, when you look at where we are and what we have to offer, the ability to attract any significant FDI has been a challenge. CBI has been helping significantly in that area, Mr. President. And we must acknowledge that. That is one of the areas that we have used successfully to attract foreign direct investment into our country in various areas. And as you know in the budget, CBI program is expected to bring in $174 million in relation to grants as it comes under to finance the PSIP, the Public Sector Investment Program. So it is going to be a significant player as we go forward in 2021, and the program is making sure it is getting ready to assess and to deal with the level and the volume of applicants that we believe is going to happen under the program in 2021. So for example, we have just digitized our platform, and we are now by the 4th of January, going to be able to accept all applications digitally, and approvals and so on will all be able to be handled digitally. So we are preparing to get that program fully operational to accept the demands. And when we looked at the international trend for investment migration, Mr. President, I can tell the Grenadian public in general that it is a growing market. Growing. It is a $1 trillion business. Grenada only occupies probably 2% or less of the market, so there's real room for us to grow. But we have to do that in a managed way. I want to spend a few minutes on Marketing Board because it has come up for many discussions, and I sit as chairman of that organization, and I want to make a few points because I think it is important. Everyone knows that Marketing Board has had its issues, financially primarily, and there is recently a discussion of the focus of the Marketing Board in terms of its marketing of farmers' produce. But before I go to talk about some of the ills of Marketing Board, I must also talk about some of the positive things that have happened over the years with Marketing Board. We're the only organization that is being HACCP certified. HACCP certified here meaning that we are the only organization that can certify produce that needs to be exported in a healthy and well-packaged way. And you know, when our SOURSUP was given that access to the US market, it was not by accident, it was because they believe that we have a certification here that can verify that the things we do are done in a proper manner from the time we pick it to the time we package it and we sell and we export. Marketing Board over the years have been consistent in its relationship with its farmers, and we may argue that that relationship over the years have changed, and it has changed. And we may argue about pricing and what is happening about pricing and how we deal with farmers. But let me just say that over the years, Marketing Board has been consistent in being able to offer farmers an avenue to come to them and sell. We have probably 200 farmers still on with contracts. That is significant. It is not insignificant. And Marketing Board plays its role. In the crisis, we said to all farmers, when there was no hotels to sell to, when there were no areas of the supermarkets and what was happening to sell to, we said to them, come to us with all your produce, we will buy everything. And we did that. So farmers who had produce in the field never had the issue of spoilage or couldn't sell. We took everything. We in turn sold to the public. We gave to the institutions, the hospitals, the prisons, and so on. But we were there to provide that support to our farmers. So I want to make it very clear that Marketing Board continues to be an instrumental part of the farming community. We have extension officers that go out regularly to discourse with farmers to understand what is happening and how it is happening. And you know, our farmers representative was a former employee of Marketing Board. He's very familiar with what to do at Marketing Board. I am not saying that we don't need to relook the formula, relook what we have in Marketing Board and the present model, and to see how we could change it to get it to react better and to be better. I can say to this House and to the public in general, we have just done a significant amount of analysis on Marketing Board, both financial and otherwise, in order to understand going forward how the financial model needs to be tweaked to get this organization to be profitable, to get the organization to have the kind of cash flow that it needs to service its obligations properly and on time. So that is one of the things that we have done. And as we present our budgets, as a matter of fact, later on Friday, this is one of the areas that we're going to be looking at. What I can say, though, is when you have looked at the analysis, I know that the model that we have now cannot change unless we need to, the model in the sense that commodities interacting with fresh produce and what we do and how we do that that needs to be significantly looked at, because without commodities, I can tell you, Marketing Board will not survive. And I say that because if we were to go only on fresh produce, our gross profit margins on fresh produce over the last 7 years have been in the 20s. No organization could survive on a gross margin, a gross profit of 20-something%. In other words, a cost of sale of 70+ cents on every dollar that you collect. It cannot, to meet its other expenses. So we either change the entire project profile of Marketing Board, or we have some more serious discussions as we go forward on that. And then in recent times, the channels to market, the various channels we use to market our produce and other things have changed significantly with COVID. Significantly. The number of liquor sellers we have now out of their vehicles, out of their liquor tables and so on has significantly grown. Farmers are now going directly and sell to these people, and then they on-sell to the general public. So it is no longer a situation where Marketing Board probably have an outlet in Grand Anse, one in Tong, one in Sautez, one in Grenville, and being able to meet the needs, because everybody's all over the place. And so we now have to adjust to that change and see how we can work with it as well. We have been very consistent in Marketing Board in paying our farmers. I want to say a little thing on price. The pricing situation for us, we have always come under the hammer for that. But in years, when you look at, we have always, over the years, average price keeps going up. And part of the issue with price is that a lot of farmers don't understand their cost as well. So when a farmer comes to us and says, listen, you want to pay me $3.50 a pound for tomatoes, and that's too low. My next question is, what is your cost of production of the tomato per pound? And a lot of them can't tell us that. And if they can't tell me that, how do they know that my price of $3.50 a pound is too high or too low? And that is part of the problem. And when I listened to Senator Bola yesterday talking about the need for our farmers to get more business-oriented, it is critical. They need to understand that farming is not just a situation of you put on 200 trees of tomato, you expect a yield of X%, and this is how much pounds you get, and what is happening, and whether or not when you put in your cost in, the price that you sell or the price that you need to get to recover your cost and other things is a reasonable price. And we have said to farmers, I have said to my friends in Marketing Board and the management in Marketing Board, we are happy to pay more. But if you want me to pay more, you have to guarantee me supply, guarantee me quality. So there's a production side to it that needs to be addressed as well. We have no difficulty paying farmers more, but it cannot be paying more and I'm not sure what they're getting from one day to the next. So we must get a certain level of production planning in place so that we could get this thing to be done properly. The other part is airlift for export. There's a lot of potential for export. I think Senator for Agriculture mentioned the issue of fruit fly, golden apples, and the challenges that came with that. So these are areas that we have to look at. The issue of export of soursop and what happens there. We have some serious challenges there. But the export issue and the airlift for export is critical. And the fact that we're going to have, in the new airport design, an area set aside for that is positive. We now have to get ourselves ready to maximize on that and exploit that in a major way. So with those few words on Marketing Board, Mr. President, I want to say that yes, the institution has its difficulties. We've been working hard over the last year or two to rectify them and get them in a place where they could be more assured of how they go forward and what is going to happen to them as we move forward. I move quickly into the issue of fiscal issues and talk briefly on that. In this presentation of the private sector this year, Mr. President, I am not going to spend a lot of time on the figures, because as I said earlier, the only certainty we have for 2021 is uncertainty. So I know some figures have been presented, but I take it in the sense that it may or may not come as we would like it to happen. But I want to make some comments. When you look at the analysis that have been presented, we expect a decline by 12.2% in GDP for 2020. That's the expectation, that's the forecast. We're also projecting a growth of 6% in GDP for 2021. In absolute terms, we're talking about an 18+% turnaround in GDP from where we expect to end and where we expect to be in 2021. Now, when you look at the sectors to drive that, which is agriculture and construction, and to some degree retail trade, I have my concerns about that. The fact that we have never, in the last 5 years, had a GDP growth of 6%. Haven't. It has averaged around 4.5% for the last 5 years or so. We have never attained 6%. So I believe that 6% could be a stretch. And the fact that we have to come from a contraction at 12.2% and grow by 6%, we're talking about a turnaround at 18% in GDP. No. The budget is heavily premised on construction. Construction, rightfully so, is a short-term measure to create employment, to generate revenues, activity in the economy. It is a short-term measure. All governments, all countries are going to use construction and PSIP to generate economic activity and to get the economies to move. A lot have been said on our ability of capacity and implementation. We have had an issue of implementation. We put in a Ministry of Implementation, and we still weren't able to reach the capital budgets, what we budget to what we spend. So we have a real issue with implementation. And I want to add on top of that, the issue of capacity. Capacity is a little different to implementation. Implementation, as Minister Cox said yesterday, and as I say, the devil is in the details. He gave some of the details yesterday to help with implementation. Thankfully so. He said they're looking and they're going out to hire more technocrats, whether it be engineers, project managers, and all of that, so that these projects can be, move quicker and slower and to reduce the red tape and the bureaucracy. That is welcome. But if we're doing that, we have to do that now, because at the year starts, 2021 starts in the next couple of weeks, and the implementation rate is going to have to be phenomenal for us to get that 6% growth under the construction budget and the PSIP plan. And I'm wondering, and seriously wondering, if we can do that. Capacity issues speak to the fact that, do we have enough crawlers? Equipment here now, Mr. President. If the private sector, as detailed in this budget, is going to be involved in billion-dollar projects that we are projecting to come, Mount Hartman and others, and these projects start in any serious way in 2021, and they start using up our equipment in terms of crawlers and backhoes and so on, would the government have enough for their projects and what they want to do under the PSIP program? The road construction and all that comes with that is going to require serious equipment and the deployment of that equipment. This is capacity. Do we have the capacity in terms of the equipment to handle the rate of implementation of these projects and the completion, and to generate the level of employment and economic activity that we want to do in the economy? And I want to come specifically to this economic activity aspect through construction, because, Mr. President, I've stood up in this Senate over the years and complained bitterly that local businessmen are treated as though they are poison when it comes to projects of government. Why I say that, and I say that with very little apology, we just have to go and beg to be included to get work under the material aspects and other aspects for the projects. I mean, I know of no other country, and I want to speak to Barbados in particular. You think any local businessman in Barbados had to go and beg a government project to get the business? They won't sometimes even give us an opportunity to bid. And there is this new technical term about sole source. And there's a rule against sole source. We are not saying sole source, come to us only. We are saying, give us an opportunity to bid on the project, and let us see whether we can meet the quality requirements, the technical requirements, and the pricing. And we just keep going around with this thing, and when we go to the various ministries, works and so on, they tell us this is what the contract requires. How could we as a government engage in a contract, whether it's grant funding or a loan, and say to us that we're excluding our business people in the sense that it has to be sole source and other things that we use? I can't understand that. And why it is that we have to be begging to come to be part and sit on the table to get an opportunity to bid for these projects. We must change that. We must. And if we want to invest $300 and something million in the PSIP program, and get this to work, or the only way the economic activity from these projects could trickle down to us in this economy is through our businesses and through those who provide services to these projects, the people who have run heavy equipment, people who make blocks. All of us need to be part of this issue of getting into the projects. And we must change that thinking, Mr. President, or else I don't know how we're going to get the economic activity that we want. When we look at the medium-term strategy paper, it says that over the next 5 years, the projected GDP is going to go from 6. So we actually seeing for 2021, 6, 2022, it dropped into 4.8, and 2023, it dropped into 3. So in other words, we're getting back to the more realistic terms of what GDP growth is going to be. So that is why I said initially, Mr. President, I wonder about that 6% growth for 2021. And I'm going to talk to the downside and upside risks in a little while. Issues with the construction sector, not really issues. The positive side is job creation, of course, increased economic activity I just spoke to, and the short-term part. The issue of construction was mentioned, I think, by Senator Cox and Senator Bowler. Productive investments in what we do with projects under the PSIP versus going into straight construction like roads and bridges that have a very short lifespan. You invest in that, people get employed for a few weeks, a few months, and then the project ends, the economic activity ends. So there must be a certain level of balance in the productive side of the PSIP program. And that is where a lot of discussion came in from my colleague in agriculture of agro-processing, in particular as one area where we could get a productive investment and will continue to generate business and income from over the years. And I'm going to come to that in a little while. I spoke about capacity, implementation, and of course, the devil in the details, which we spoke about. I know a lot have been made about the cap spend and the part with loans, and I know my senator to my right spoke about the fact that we're going into more loans. Yes, we are going to go into more loans. We are going to take, according to the figures presented, $44 million in loans. $174 million is going to come from grants through primarily NTF and other grants. The public debt is expected to end 2021 at 65.7, move into 63.7, move into 62.7, 2022 and 2023 respectively. So it's going to stay in the range of the 60s. We are coming from a 58%, so it is going to increase. But I'm not worried from the standpoint that there is no country coming out of a pandemic that would not have to entertain more debt in order to deal with what its situation as macroeconomics is presenting. I recently read an article coming out of the IMF recently where the IMF is now looking to engage more deeply with countries to have available over $1 billion US available to countries that need to engage in concessionary loans to help to bring the economy back to some level of stability and economic activity that we're accustomed to. IMF wouldn't look to do that if they didn't recognize that that was one of the ways and the instruments that we have to use. The question for us is being able to generate a level of GDP that could keep the debt to GDP at a ratio that is not burdensome. And we know what it is to have high debt to GDP ratios. So I'm not very concerned about that, and I say that from a private sector point of view because in the past when we had debt, there was a risk that the government engaging in more debt could crowd out the private sector if it wanted to engage in expansion and being able to access debt through the traditional banking institutions. That is not an issue now because we understand that the liquidity situation in these banks are pretty strong, so that once bankable projects, and I want to state that quickly, bankable projects. And I know when my senator from agriculture spoke about some of the ideas which I applaud and I'm going to talk to just now, and Senator Bowler spoke about the bankability of projects. Now, this is a serious thing. And one of the reasons that traditional institutions, banks, don't get into agriculture is only because of one reason, risk, and how to mitigate risk. I am not going to lend money to you in any project, whether it be agriculture or not, if you can't mitigate the risk for me when you present your project. Agriculture is one sector that comes under higher scrutiny than others because of the risk, because of the nature of agriculture and its dependence on weather, disease, the lack of diseases, and so on and so forth. How you mitigate that is going to be a serious question. I know we talk about greenhouse. I know we're speaking about engaging more technology in agriculture. And if we want to move agriculture, we have no choice but to do that. And we must do those things. Unemployment, the government has indicated 28.4%, approximately 14,000 jobs as a result was lost through the collapse of tourism, and hopefully construction is going to help to bring back some of that to some degree and create some level of hope. But we must continue to understand, Mr. President, that part of the risks associated going forward is still our vulnerability to natural phenomena that could present natural disasters for us. We have been very fortunate in this season. We had 30+ systems going through. We outlived the normal alphabet, and we had to go into the Greek-Roman alphabet in order to meet some of the names that was coming forward. And climate change, and what that brings to us is significant as we go forward and we look at these issues that are coming to face us. So we have to be prepared to deal with these risks and what is going to happen. I did promise I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the figures. I think the figures are what they are. And I said initially that there are a number of areas that is cited in the budget, and we have to pray and hope that a lot of it is hinging on the fact that we're going to be heavily involved in construction. But I want to spend a quick time on the risks that was presented. And when you read the papers presented, there is one on risk, and the background and the context within this budget was presented, and to highlight some of the risks coming forward. There is the pandemic, of course, and how the pandemic in the developed markets are going to be mitigated and how it's going to be dealt, hopefully through the vaccine, and how that is going to impact our area here in terms of the tourism and the rebound of the tourism industry. There is the issue of tightening global financial markets and our access to funding, whether through loans, grant funding, or otherwise. That is going to present a challenge. Risks again for us on the revenue side. The reduction in remittances, that is significant. So remittances represent a significant inflow of revenue to the average person that could help put money in their pocket and help again generate economic activity, help to deal with VAT and the collection of VAT as they purchase goods and what is going to happen across that tax type. Contraction in trading centers affecting tourism and foreign direct investments. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a cushion for that through CBI. Rise in international oil prices, something that is going to affect us on the energy side, and the cost, as you know, oil pervades every aspect of our society. Vulnerability to natural disasters, we spoke on that, and how that can affect our debt to GDP. But the one I want to spend a little time on, Mr. President, which I don't think the framers of this budget in the risk identified, and that, in my view, is a major risk, and that is the issue of the labor climate. And I believe that is critical for us. A lot of what the government wants to achieve on the expenditure side rests on labor becoming a partner to deal with us on these issues. Industrial relation issues, salary increases, suspension and deferral, attitude to work, job security versus increased payments and other benefits, and how we posture to deal with that is going to be a significant downside risk if we don't manage that properly. You know, a lot was said about the 4% increase, and Senator Bola dealt with it aptly yesterday in his response. I don't need to repeat that. But I believe if all of us is being called on for sacrifice, and I hear labor has always said that every time we talk about sacrifice, we look at the employees first to make sacrifice. And that may be so to some degree. But for us in business and otherwise, paying salaries is a critical thing, and it is our major fixed cost. And if the average man don't understand what fixed costs mean, it means that regardless of what we do, there's a cost we have to meet. You can't vary it because it's agreed ahead of time that that is an area that we must pay. So paying salaries for any institution is a critical thing. Senator Bola spoke about yesterday the fact that government paid right through the crisis. Nobody lost their job. Everybody was paid, and not only paid, paid on time. Paid on time. For us, not government alone, even in the private sector, those of us who were able to keep our employees, SGU is a good example. We in the private sector paid everybody on time and without no loss. There are many businesses, Mr. President, that had to cut salaries by 20%, some as much as 50%. Some have to take out shifts. Some have to send home people, downsize. A lot of people have been stressed. But there are a lot of us who have gotten these things, but we're not counting our blessings. Barbados, when they were challenged with the lockdown, were offering to pay their public servants with bonds. That and a refusal, and I don't know if they ever got around to settling the issue, but that was where the government had to resort to. In Grenada's situation, we didn't have to come to that, and we need to be appreciative of this situation. We need to ask ourselves the question, Mr. President, from where I see it in a private sector point of view. Which is more important, having a job, or asking for increases, or asking for bonuses, whatever it is, and have the risk and possibility of that business have to downsize as a result? We need to significantly ask that question. And it's not only about sacrifice. I know of properties where the first people to take salary cuts was management, not only line staff. So it's all of us in this in a partnership. All of us are required to think a little harder and deeper as we go forward. As I said, Mr. President, I'm repeating it again, the only certainty we have is uncertainty. And this situation is very fluid as we go forward. My businesses may be doing okay now, but in a matter of one instance, we could go back into lockdown if we have a community spread or some sort of spread. And we know, I heard the Minister of Health say we might have access to vaccines in March. I hope so, but we know that countries like ourselves, small and micro, even though we have the COVAX situation, which will ensure that we have some access to these vaccines, would not happen until probably significantly in the second half of 2021. So we have to be very careful between now and June to ensure that we follow the protocols and do what we have to do. So it is important for us to stay on ball and on target as we move forward. Quickly, Mr. President, I want to touch on the issue of private sector and our view of what have been presented so far. First of all, we welcome the fact that there are no new taxes that was put on into this budget. It offers the private sector the ability to be more predictable, and it offers us the opportunity to plan better as we move forward in these very uncertain times. We do have some concerns, though, when the Minister of Finance in the other place spoke about the collection of arrears, and I want to spend 2 minutes on that. Over the years, we are sure that the arrears figure that comes forward from Inland Revenue Department has never been very accurate. And that is the first challenge the government will face. The ability to understand the level of accuracy in the arrears figure that comes forward on all the tax types. And I have personal experience of that, Mr. President. I pay my land tax on time, every time. And every time I get an estimate, you tell me I owe in arrears. I go back one time, and I tell them, I say, I show them all the receipts. The guy tell me, thanks, Mr. Diallo, we go take out the arrears situation in the computer. I tell them, I want a letter from them saying, and the next year, you come up with the same arrears figure. I say that to say that if my experience on my land tax is that, I should have to think what some of the other areas are and how accurate that arrears figure is. So when I hear the Minister of Finance say we're going with some level of enthusiasm to collect this arrears figure, I want to know probably if he knows how much of it is really arrears and could collect. And I think the issue has to not so much be on arrears, because when we had the pandemic, the government gave us moratoriums in terms of giving us a break as to how we pay and when we pay, and that was welcome, and we welcome that. And I believe the issue here has to be more around compliance and how much of us have complied since March and since the pandemic. And I'm certain that the compliance rate, which normally averages in the 80s for most of the tax types, so we have corporation tax, we have land tax, we have stamp tax, we have withholding tax, all of these taxes, I am certain that the compliance rate in previous to COVID was in the 80s, particularly land tax, I know used to hit the 90s. So the issue is, have the compliance rate come down to a point where we need to get more vigilant and engage in more discussions with the people who owe us these taxes and to see, based on their situation, whether they need moratoriums or whether they need a payment plan based on their current situation. And I think that has to be the approach, more so than say we're going after people who owe in the government plenty of money. And you know, arrears carry with it a thing called interest and penalty. And 90% of the time, the interest and penalty is not collectible because the arrears are wrong. So then the government gets a false sense that they have a lot of money to collect under that particular type in the tax department. So that is something we need to pay some attention to and look at other ways we can improve the compliance and hopefully get businesses that are in trouble, some of them have died, and so on, and what can be done in these situations. I mentioned that the private sector is hopeful, and we hope that the confidence level, as this budget is hoping to project, is achieved through the various construction projects in terms of implementation, capacity, and rate, and hopefully we can see some spin-off in our businesses that can help us to generate economic activity and to keep us sustainable and alive as we move forward. I want to quickly go and talk on agro-processing, Mr. President, as part of a private sector initiative. You know, when I, in previous times, stood in this Senate, I was extremely critical of GCNE. And I make no apologies at the time when I was critical of GCNE, because I think the governance structure requires some adjustments still. But you know, when I engage my senatorial colleague on my left, and I see some of the great work he has done with his organization, he being at the helm, I wonder if that is a reflection of youth and youthful energy, or is it a reflection of a change in thinking? And I am praying that he has the support of his board to continue in that line. And Mr. President, I will be the first one to jump and say that in recent days I visited a shop in the lagoon and I had an experience with a particular drink called a nutmeg cooler. And let me tell you, I have been impressed from the time I went to the shop and experiencing the cooler. And if that is an indication of where GCNA is going to go with value added, because you know we have spent a lot of time on the oil issue and talk about the successes and failure of that. But here is a young MD, a young GM, that have decided to take the pod of the nutmeg. No, we never used to get nothing for the pod. Right. To be more biologically precise, the pericarp. We have never, as farmers, been paid for that. No farmers have an opportunity to pay attention to the pod and when they harvest, because they could get, you're coming from zero for the pod to whatever they're paying for the pod now. Right. And then I'm just talking about the cooler. But they're doing many other things with the pod. They're pickling it, they're making jam, they're doing all sorts of things with this thing. And Mr. President, we must complement when it comes to these things, because over the years we have seen a level of inertia on the nutmeg side, and it's always about we can't make this, we need money support, we need this. This is a good positive change. What we need now is to make sure we get the investments to grow these areas. And Senator Bola on the other side spoke about the initiatives, and if we could use what we have now and see, we have a lot of nutmeg receiving stations, probably we could change one into a facility where we could do that production of the cooler and other things. And this is probably some of the things we need to bear and see how government could support, not necessarily financially, but get private sector people to come. Here and I have been talking and see if I could get investors to come and take an interest in these products. That is the way we have to go. And I compliment them, Mr. President. I feel strongly about that because generally in agro-processing, we have had a lot of starts and a lot of failures in agro-processing. That's the reality. Since the days of the revolution, and Senator for Labour in here, But since then, we have had a produce chemist lab that have come out with various projects and different aspects, but somehow we slow to be on the uptake with agro-processing. We had a juicing company, I think it was in St. David's, you could correct me if I'm wrong, that used to make some really good juices out source up and so on. They complained about having the produce and having to be able to get it, and that was an area of raw material challenge. And that is an area, as we go forward, that our brother needs, we need to talk and see how we can encourage, because agro-processing, from the time, you know, Mr. President, I know you know that well. You were a child of the revolution, probably an adult at the time. I was more of a child. Right. And when we started to make Tambron juice in the days of the revolution and juice Tambron and come out with that juice, that was one of the best juices we ever had. We had a problem with the canning.
Especially drinking it with strong rum.
I know, I won't go there. But when we used to engage in that, the first set of cannons, the cans used to explode. There used to swell, and they eventually rectified that. But when they used to bottle it in plastic bottles, it had absolutely no problem, absolutely. And the taste was phenomenal. And I mean, could you imagine? We started that in the days of the revolution. If we were to have the testicular fortitude, Mr. President, to continue, we would have been way ahead, right? But it, according to Mr. Trump, it is what it is. We have to start back. In fact,
Senator, as you know, the demand market for the pepper sauce that was being produced was so huge that there was consideration of setting down a plant just for the pepper sauce alone. So
yeah, and I didn't mention the pepper sauce.
You're recollecting well. Yes.
I didn't mention the pepper sauce. Yeah. He introduced us at lunch yesterday to the pepper sauce. Again, excellent products coming out of, yeah. And I have endeavored to work with my senatorial colleague in agriculture and GCB to see if we could get some sort of level of private sector involvement and how we could push that forward. We welcome from the private sector the government's increase to GDP of 1.7 million to help with small business, and we hope that this could further help, because we all know that small and micro business is an area of serious rural employment, and a lot of them have died in the COVID environment. So the initiative here through GDB is an excellent one. I caution that, and you know, Senator Bola spoke about it yesterday, our people, and I don't want to say farmers, I don't want to highlight farmers, we don't like to pay back. I can't say it no other way. We just don't like to, and especially when they believe it's government funds. It was the thing, government funds is theirs and it's free. And they don't understand that when they don't pay back, then there's no more funds available for others who may need it. And that is a vicious cycle. So I want to plead with our people. I mean, could you imagine, as Senator Bola said yesterday, a person in a government institution, when a farmer comes to pay, you don't ask him what he's talking about, and you don't have to pay? I can't believe that, Mr. President. That has to be a special kind of thinking that we must change. If that person have a mortgage in a bank, and you know, I don't want to use the connotation of a foreigner or a white man on top of us. They come in assiduously every month to pay their mortgage. But when it's us in government, they tell themselves somehow they don't need to pay. That is a problem, and then we must change that. We must change that in order for us to continue. Agriculture and fisheries. I am not going to spend a lot of time was spent on that yesterday. But, you know, when I listen to my colleague friend talk about various initiatives under agriculture that he has and he have come forward with, the ideas, and I think some of them had to deal with setting up the same processing, agro-processing for farmers and to bring all of them in. The idea of having shade houses or greenhouses in a big area and inviting and leasing. I thought those were revolutionary ideas. The first time I'm hearing it. So I think there are ideas that we need to explore. You know, the cooperatives issue. For years, I wondered why cooperatives don't work in Grenada. For years. And at one time, Mr. President, I thought the word was the wrong word. Because anytime we say cooperatives, we put in failure. A lot of cooperatives have started and failed. There are few around now that's working, primarily led by women. And I believe that is a virtue of the lady folk. They're serious, they're detailed in their approach, and when they set their mind on something, 99% of the time they achieve it. And if that is what we have to do, sorry for women, but we have some problems. Boy, we have some issues with that. But when I heard the Senator for Agriculture mention about the size of the cooperatives, and the fact that the legislation doesn't cater for small ones, like 4, and so on, I said, here is a bottleneck. Here is a bottleneck. So probably the bad word is not cooperatives. The bad word is we need to change, amend the legislation to be able to facilitate a 4-member cooperative or a 5-member cooperative, as the case may be, that can work. And Mr. President, I think we have to push that, and we have to push that fast. Because if we want to talk about agriculture playing this pivotal role in relation to food security and giving families an opportunity to gain revenue and get some security on their side as a financial security, I ain't going to touch pretty larceny. There's another sour part. But we must address the issue of cooperatives and dealing with that. And I put that on the side of my colleagues on the other side, that's an amendment that through agriculture or through ever, we need to come to this parliament quickly to get adjusted so we can facilitate the sizing of these cooperatives. And I believe that is an area that we need to work on quickly. I want to talk about fish. And I know my brother, if he didn't mention fisher folk, he'd have been in plenty of trouble. Yes. And I want to talk about fish and fisher folk. Because the fishing industry is an industry in this country that have been given some of the most concessions you could think about. And it's not only because we want to encourage men to fish. I think it's also because of the nature of the industry, the dangers associated with it, and what happens. But the reality of it, the average fisherman is not a businessman. He's a fisherman or a fisherwoman. He's not a businessman or businesswoman. So when the representative for Agriculture and Fisheries spoke about setting up these local hubs to manage them and manage their business, help them with business plan, help them to see how to cost their product, understand their revenues, all of that, marketing, I thought that was, again, a revolutionary idea. We need to invest in them in that area. And it's not them fishermen alone. I know many medical practitioners that don't have a clue about their business. They're excellent doctors because that's how they have been trained. But when it comes to managing their business, lawyers as well, there are a lot of legal people that can manage their business. It's not a weakness. It is a reality that some of us in our specialities don't necessarily have a business acumen. And we need to recognize that at that level, and we need to push that. And I support that wholeheartedly. And I say to you, if you need the assistance of the private sector, because some of us in the private sector tend to be a little better businessmen than normal, you could come to us. And I want to pledge my support to you in that area. I want to continue the fishing thing. Because for years, I've been saying in this upper house, Mr. President, we have enough fish houses. I clear on that. We have enough fish place to go and sell the fish, bring up the fish and so on. And I know Senator Cox yesterday or Senator Bola spoke about the issue of the ice makers and the fact that we're going to be remedying that and dealing with refrigerated trucks. I only want to say to you, Senator, make sure we have a maintenance program put in place. If we had to put back 8 ice machines or fix 8 ice machines in these fish vending areas, something had to be wrong with the maintenance. Something have to be wrong with the maintenance. And every time we go back out and we have to source and get equipment, it costs us more if we just do the maintenance right. And if government want to control expenditure, there's an area. We must talk about maintenance. I want to talk about all the police vehicle and all of that and the fleet and all the drama that's going on there. Because there is a major leak when it comes to government revenues in terms of spending to keep our vehicles for the security forces viable and operational. Major leak because we have very little maintenance or no maintenance program in a planned way. When we have to take vehicles off to check for brakes, check for this, check for that, check for oil. Some of our vehicles running under the security RGPF, the last day they get oil change, and then they seize. And then we have to buy a whole engine. But coming back to the fish issue, I believe, and I know it was spoken about by the colleague senator, dry fish, fish in school, all of that, I think is areas the Minister of Agriculture and in discussion, and he seems to have a very good relationship with the Minister of Agriculture, both for fisheries and agriculture, because we separate them now, and that could be a good thing because we could isolate what we want to do. But when we talk about getting $1.8 million US, I believe, from Japan, I want to put this on the table for consideration. Can we please ask them to look at a project to do fish processing? That means I have 15 minutes, right? Could we please look for getting some level of fish processing done? Whether it's not, we have a lot of tuna that sometimes we can't ship. And tuna is not our price fish. It's dolphin and other things. Can't we have some mechanism to we just sell tuna in flakes, in oil, in water, in all kind of nonsense for us here. Everything coming in. We can't do that up to now. And I mean, I am a chemical engineer. I know the facilities to do our fish processing is not very expensive and equipment is not a lot. But could you think of the possibilities of a fisherman catching tuna, cannot export, or doesn't meet the requirements for export, and we could still sell it. And to do canning, and we can now sell that on, whether it's locally and otherwise, it is a huge area that we could look at. And all these times over the years we get in from Japan, all the assistance, welcome assistance to develop the fishing and jetties and so on. We need to take it to the next stage. We're tired buying fish. Teach us to fish now. We want to be supportive of our own self. Give us a fish processing plant that we can do that in. So, I don't have much time. I ain't going to spend much time on the commodity boards. I think my senator on the other side captured that nicely yesterday. When you talk about insurance, I want to just guide you. Dr. Cullen Gilchrist, he's now a PhD. His thesis was dealing with insurance, cooperation, and the concept and how we could look at something there for our farmers, both on health. It would be good to get a download of his document and take a read. I think there are excellent ideas there on how we could fashion something for our farmers that wouldn't be too costly for us and for us to maintain. Mr. President, quickly to security, I want to say that, in all of the pandemic and all that has gone on, and I heard the compliments go to the frontline workers, but I want to always single out the RGPF because, in the pandemic, RGPF was stretched, I think, to the limits of almost bursting to have to deal with the issues of the pandemic and still have to deal with the other issues that we face as a society, whether it be abuse and child abuse and all that goes with that, whether it be perennial larceny or whether it be basic crime that will be happening, housebreaking and so on. So if for no other reason, I want to compliment the RGPF on an excellent job they have done so far for 2020. All aspects of the RGPF. I saw last night on the news that Commissioner Frank just received some help for the Coast Guard to patrol the coast and to help with drug interdiction. Again, we welcome that, and we really look at we depend heavily on RGPF, Mr. President. We take our security for granted. We can walk down the road, we can go down on quarantine point, sit down in a vehicle, enjoy the sky and the moon, and nobody harass us. We take a lot of that for granted. And the only time we just really get to understand is when we see what happens in other countries and we compare ours. Right next door, Trinidad. What's happening in Venezuela and to some degree in Trinidad. We have to be thankful for security forces and what they have done and how they have protected us over 2020, not only from the security standpoint, but from the public health standpoint. They have done an excellent job, and we must say that, and I keep on saying that. We have not seen a spike in crime, and Senator Sincere spoke about the psychological and the psycho-trauma that comes with a pandemic and being locked down. And we know in that Caribbean people, our sociability, we know about not hugging and kissing and touching and so on. And when you prevent us from those, the psycho-trauma that comes with that could be significant. And again, I say, we have been able to manage that, not probably to the best, but once we are aware of it, we can look at interventions that can help. So I want to say thank you, a big thank you to the security forces. They have been allotted 51.6 million in the budget. I hope they use all. I know they use all. And if we could give them more, more. And I heard my friend talk about the Grenville Police Station, and I hear the response to that from Senator Cox, and I'm happy to hear that. I also hear the response on the fire station, because I had planned to knock him over in knuckles if he had moved the fire station from Tonga and he didn't give us some sort of relief. So I'm glad to hear that it's not being contemplated in the way some people are saying it's going to be contemplated. So I'm happy about that, Mr. President. And, you know, we didn't talk about the response of the fire service. The last fire we had down in Lower Lucas Street, we just quick to jump on social media and say all the wrong things, Mr. President. But when we had to compliment our firemen for reaching there, dealing with the situation, isolating it, buildings to the left and to the right didn't sustain any major damage. They may have some water damage, but clearly the response time, and I am noting in the last few incidents of fire, everybody have been complimenting the fire service on their response time and their ability to deal with the situation quickly. We must commend that, and we have to not take it. We must. So I quickly move to, I think I have 10 minutes left, 5 minutes to wrap up. 10. Right. I want to quickly talk about the environmental sustainability and what happens there, and security. And I know my friend, leader of government business, that is. And I want to say that, you know, the private sector supports the fact that the legal framework for dealing with solar energy in Grenada needs to be changed. Clearly, we support that. And when you look at CARICOM, and particularly I want to single out Barbados in this issue, and where Barbados is going with solar technology, and where we are so far back in terms of vehicles and ports to charge and so on and so on. It is working in serious, close relationship with the generator of the power and what needs to happen there. So we must deal with that. I want to throw out something to you. Recently, a private sector company in Barbados launched a project of solar panels. So they set up a solar farm with, say, 500 panels. And one of the things that came out of that is that instead of selling shares in the business, they were selling panels as shares. So you come in this business, you buy 5 panels. It may cost you $3,000 or $5,000. But the intent of this business is that when I sell what I produce from this panel farm to the grid, the monies I get back, I share it in proportion to the investment you made in my panels. That's a revolutionary idea of how to change investment and how we do investment differently and how we could capitalize on solar, something that we have 390 days of the year. Revolutionary. And it is started in Barbados, Mr. President. We could talk about it here. I know the government have initiatives about removing duties and so on solar-related technology and technology related to these kind of things. Excellent. But we need to take it a step further. We need to encourage businessmen to partner, and let's see how we could develop these ideas. Well, that's right. I spoke about the legal framework first, and I'm clear about that. And Mr. President, that is an area I want to see us moving. I know about the city and getting all of that. Excellent, but we need to take it a step further and make it workable for our people. A young man called me the other day, Mr. President, and he said, Mr. Diari, you know when young people start to work, some of them who are work, the first thing they want to buy is a car to move around. He said, why they don't have a certain amount of shares allocated for me in agro-processing business? They say for young people between 18 and 25, we're putting aside 10,000 shares for them alone, based on their age, and encourage them to invest in vehicles like that. Not the car. Yeah, you can get a piece of land, but get them into business and investing in business. None of us will do that when we put out shares. Say that a certain portion is allotted for young people. Come. You might even give them a different price. You never know. But the amount we may see coming might surprise us. We need to think about our youth in that kind of way and encourage them to invest in that kind of manner. I believe I spoke about labor and the risk, and I want to quickly say on labor Now, when we talk about motivation for workers, I highlighted a few things. Being paid on time, being paid generally, safe work environment, providing pension benefits, health insurance, and recently I heard about housing for public servants, giving them preference to use that. It is not all about pay. It is not all about pay. So you know that pay ranks probably third or fourth down on the list when it comes to worker satisfaction in the environment. Pay is never at the top. We need to change that. And the quick thing on productivity that was mentioned yesterday, the union and labor in this country still frowns on linking performance to productivity and to pay, and to bonuses. They still frown on that. A lot of us in the private sector, and I know Senator Sincere, where she working, if you ain't perform, you're going to be assessed, and if your performance is below, we're going to deal with you in one form or the other. You have to get us thinking about linking performance to pay. We have profit sharing. Excellent idea. I have no problem with that. But somewhere along there, we have to find a way to link payment of profit sharing to some performance. That is something we have to talk about in deep and deeper. So, President, I wrap up. I want to say, as I conclude, that COVID and this COVID environment is not going to be an easy challenge as we go forward. And I want to implore all of our people to pay attention, be safe, practice what we have been practicing for most of this year and have been kept safe. It works. The protocols work. Social distancing, wearing of our masks, even though it is uncomfortable, hand sanitizing, it works. Let us keep doing it. That is the only way we could keep ourselves, our family, and our extended family in the country safe. And we must be responsible to do that. And some of us, we had a recent thing with a ZESA party in Trinidad. We don't want to go down that road. We want to, I know we young people having cabin fever, and they want to go out and they want to do. I wanted to go and fed this week to Mr. President. I can't fed no other thing. All of us have it, but we have to make the sacrifice. I want to express great thanks to my senatorial colleagues for the support this year. It has been a challenging year, and all of us, I believe, have worked particularly in good form to keep this House at the level and quality it is at. We have 2 new young senators, 3 on my side. Senator Sinclair, Sincere. I know all they talk about St. Andrews. But, Mr. President, I agree with you. We've got to start to make something for Tom and St. George. But I will welcome our new senators. I think they bring a level of... and my good senator, but I put you in that class. You're way past that youthful stage. So, when I see the quality of these young people and what they have presented to the Senate, I'm proud. Yes, we have little things to learn and develop and so on over the time, but they were on their maiden voyage as it relates to our budget debate, and they have done themselves well. They have little tweaks, but that's fine. You learn as you go along, and I'm proud of them. And it's time to show to us, as some of the older folk, you have to release to you guys. Take it and run. I'm happy to see that. I want to also express thanks to my private sector colleagues and our chambers and all the private sector organizations for keeping me here and giving me the opportunity to express on their behalf and to articulate where I need to, as I see how it will benefit not only us in the private sector, but our country in general. Because at the end of the day, when we sit here, we think about country, even though we have constituents to think about. But the country is always our main focus and to how we could better what we have. I want to thank my family, Mr. President, because without them and the support they have given to me over the years, and in this year in particular, from being in the Senate, I thank them the deepest part of my heart because they're very important to me. So I thank them, and I thank my Creator for giving me the health and strength to be able to continue to articulate as best as I can on the issues and as best as they to present themselves. I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a productive New Year and a safe New Year. And I want to hope that as we move forward in 2021, with all that I started with, the only certainty for 2021 is uncertainty. And we need to be patient and work hand in hand with the government and everybody else to make sure we can get what we are predicting that we'd like to get. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dialli, as usual, very in-depth and comprehensive. Senator Katisha Williams, you now have the floor.
Yes.
And I preside with great expectations.
Thank you, Mr. President. No pressure, no pressure. Mr. President, honorable members, I rise to give my support to the motion to approve the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year 2021. Mr. President, the story of human civilization, and indeed the story of governance, is inexorably one of triumph and adversity, of destruction and transformation. Grenada, notwithstanding its tender age, has certainly endured its share of adversities. From being the center of a global war of political ideology to being the epicenter of a zone of destruction in the wake of natural disasters. And this year, our islands find themselves in the grip of a ferocious contagion. The only distinction with this latest trial, Mr. President, is that our tribulations with the rest of the world. But while this is a shared struggle, the reality is that the repercussions of this crisis can be much more disastrous for small nations like ours. The fact that the death tolls in certain countries are multiples of our population brings home this stark reality. We are only 112,000 people, and the death tolls in some countries are 300,000, Mr. President. So that tells you the extent of the threat that we face. And Mr. President, this state of affairs demands drastic, bold strategies and decisive action. This state of affairs demands skillful leadership, and I'm sorry that my friend Senator Lewis on the other side is not here, because he mentioned the type of leadership that is required in situations like these. This situation requires leadership that is informed, leadership that is level-headed, leadership that has been forged in the crucible of a hurricane aftermath, of an economic recession, and a successful economic recovery. Mr. President, yes, there's a lot of uncertainty, but I am certain of this, that there is no other team of leaders that is as tested and true, no other team that is as experienced in the art of pulling a country back from the brink, and no other team that is better equipped to turn the tide of sickness that threatens to destroy our way of life than this current administration. Mr. President, this government, including the Ministry of Health and the COVID team, has done a stellar job this year, particularly in ensuring that Grenada remained in the CDC's low-risk category. And while recently there have been unfortunate setbacks, we must not let this deter our resolve. This is not a battle that can be won by policies and regulations alone. This battle can only be won through the unified efforts of government and the people. And I stress on people, Mr. President, putting aside our political differences or ideological differences so that we may protect our nation and hasten our return to some semblance of normalcy. And Mr. President, this is what this budget is all about: restoring our way of life through our recovery efforts, while transforming our economy and building resilience to better withstand any possible future calamities. Mr. President, We shall be grateful for the day when this period is just another footnote in history, just another story of triumph over adversity. But we have a lot more work to do in this coming year, a lot more collective responsibility to exercise, a lot more discipline, a lot more collaboration to make this a reality. And this budget provides the roadmap for our way forward. Therefore, Mr. President, I am pleased to share with you the achievements, plans, and projections for 3 of our ministries, and I'm going to attempt to do that with limited time. And those ministries are the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Business and CARICOM Affairs, the Ministry of Social Development, Housing, Community Empowerment, and Hospital Services, and the Ministry of Legal Affairs. But, Mr. President, before I get into the ministerial portfolios, I just want to comment on something briefly mentioned by my dear Senator colleague, Diali, on the other side, and that is the skepticism he expressed in the projected rate of growth for the next year. And in my limited economic knowledge, I will leave this to the more experienced economists, but from my understanding, the drastic curtailment of economic activity resulted in the contraction of the economy by a percentage of 12.6%. That's because there was sudden loss of jobs, sudden closure of businesses. So we are starting at a point of extreme loss. And it means that in the coming year, we will be seeing the sudden opening of businesses. We will be seeing large numbers of persons suddenly going back to work. We will see businesses starting to return to their normal mode of operations. And because of that, we will see a higher growth rate in that period. So it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're just taking off with this spurt of growth. It means that because of the sudden return to economic activity, we will see an unusually higher growth rate than in the previous years, because this is not gradual growth. This is the sudden return to economic activity. So in my... Well, yes, but that is just to alleviate some of your concerns with the unusually high growth rate that is projected for the coming year. So, Mr. President, I hope that satisfied my honorable senator. And now I will get into the ministerial portfolio, starting with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Business, and CARICOM Affairs. Previously, only the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we have added international business, and we have stressed CARICOM affairs in the nomenclature. Mr. President, this ministry, while continuing to perform its core functions, has been instrumental in mobilizing resources and rallying the support of our international partners in the fight against COVID-19. All of our embassies and consulates have given selfless service to diaspora communities affected by the pandemic, providing aid and comfort to members of the community, especially those who have lost their loved ones. And we have been fortunate here in Grenada that we haven't experienced any loss of life. But we must remember the members of our diaspora, our friends and family overseas who have lost their lives, and this government sympathizes with those who are still grieving, Mr. President. Now, to aid the fight at home, we have received substantial donations of PPE, PCR and rapid test kits, and related medical supplies from the People's Republic of China, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, and our missions to the United Nations and our consulates general in Toronto and Miami. We have also received donations of over 40,000 EC dollars to the COVID Relief Fund from the High Commission of Grenada to the United Kingdom and the Grenada Consulate in Dubai. Further, our missions to the European Union and the United Nations worked with officials from the Ministry of Finance to ensure that Grenada gained access to COVID-related financing packages available through various agencies. Mr. President, in addition to this material and monetary support, we have also benefited from the generous gift of human resource from the Republic of Cuba, who dispatched teams of doctors and nurses to Grenada as they have done all over the world. And I must say again that Cuba continues to be an example in this world of a pure demonstration of internationalism. While having to battle their own domestic problems, while having to fight COVID like the rest of us, while having to deal with the loss of life of people in their own country from COVID-19, they have been dispatching their nurses and doctors and experts all over the world to help with this fight. It is said, Mr. President, that the firmest friendships have been formed in mutual adversity, as iron is most strongly united by the fiercest flame. And this quote is particularly relevant this year, as we have seen the reinforcement of our historic bonds with our international friends through their altruism and generosity at a time when they are faced with their own domestic trials. Therefore, Mr. President, we acknowledge the assistance from our regional and international partners and express our heartfelt gratitude for their unfailing support in these perilous times. This is not the first global crisis that the world has faced, nor shall it be the last. But we shall overcome this one as we had done the last, as a global community, as a family of nations. And we shall emerge stronger and more equipped to face any other eventuality. Mr. President, in addition to providing support during the pandemic, our missions and diplomats have been doing their part to remain active and engaged members of the diplomatic community. Grenada's permanent representative to the UN currently serves as the chair of the SIDS Dock Island Women Open Network, or IWON, which is a network that assists in the building of the capacity of women to participate in the transformation of small island developing states' energy sectors. And our Prime Minister, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, continues to serve as the president of SIDS-DOC. Grenada also currently serves as the chair of the United Nations Special Committee on Decolonization, or Committee 24. Mr. President, in February of this year, at the initiative of the permanent representatives of Grenada and Botswana, representatives of the African Group and the CARICOM Caucus agreed to establish the African Group CARICOM, or AFCAR, collaboration, which is an initiative to reinforce the bonds of friendship between African and CARICOM states. As a consequence of this initiative, Grenada is in the early stages of establishing diplomatic relations with the republics of Sierra Leone, Kiribati, and Rwanda. The AFCAR Joint Steering Committee is also currently co-chaired by Botswana and Grenada. And Mr. President, I would just like to note here that Africa is uncharted territory. In a lot of our diplomatic relations, we are quick to form relationships with our partners in Europe and North America and Asia, but Africa is where it's at now, Mr. President. Africa is a land of opportunity, and our partners in the People's Republic of China, they have realized that. And it's time that we also realize that and improve our diplomatic relations with our ancestral brothers in that great continent. In addition to seeking closer relations with our African counterparts, on the 6th and 20th of October of this year, Grenada signed communiques establishing diplomatic relations with Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Principality of Monaco, respectively. Grenada also expanded its relations with Turkmenistan, Albania, and the Eurasian Economic Union. In 2021, the ministry will continue to strengthen its relationship with regional and international partners, manage and maintain Grenada's diplomatic work, and do our part to shore up security and the economy. And our course of action will be guided by our strategic priorities for 2021. And these priorities will provide the roadmap to support government's efforts towards recovery, transformation, and building resilience across all sectors. And, Mr. President, I will try to give a quick summary of these priorities. There are 5 priorities, and they're as follows. 1, resource mobilization. 2, implementation of treaties and conventions. 3, the establishment of an effective cadre of honorary consuls. 4, development of our international business portfolio. And 5, implementation of a diaspora policy. Firstly, resource mobilization. And this is an obvious one, Mr. President. And this year, well, in the coming year, the ministry will pursue a robust resource mobilization plan, which will entail mobilization of grant funds, equipment, and services to aid in the implementation of plans outlined in the 2021 budget. And this is particularly relevant in the fight against COVID-19 when we are trying to resuscitate our economies. While I go through the other priorities, you will hear resource mobilization being mentioned continuously because it is the common thread. It is a common thread in our strategic priorities for the coming year. So secondly, I move on to implementation of treaties and conventions. Now, the goal of resource mobilization brings treaties and conventions into focus because Grenada is party to a number of treaties, a number of international treaties. However, the implementation of these treaties is often slowed or delayed, and that is because of a number of reasons: lack of resources, lack of human resource. In Grenada, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a small ministry, but the ministry recognizes that the implementation of treaties can yield significant benefits, including securing opportunities for our people and vital resources for the state, which is what we need in this COVID recovery period. Therefore, the ministry will place renewed focus on the implementation and fulfillment of its treaty obligations in the coming year. Specifically, the ministry will seek to implement its new treaties policy to ensure that there is consistency throughout government in its approach to treaty making and implementation. The third priority area, Mr. President, establishment of an effective cadre of honorary consuls. As we know, consular services assist Grenadian travelers and Grenadians living abroad through the provision of, among other things, passport renewals, visa applications, other information, contingency planning in times of crisis. And in our resource mobilization efforts, we recognize the need to increase our consular representation, particularly in regions where we have zero presence. And I mentioned Africa earlier. We are also cognizant of the financial realities facing governments. So, therefore, we have to strategize and find a way to improve our presence without further burdening government's coffers. And in order to do this, the ministry plans to develop a 3-year consular strategy aimed at strengthening the delivery of consular services and also enhancing public messaging. Mr. President, we move on to the development of our international business portfolio, our 4th strategic priority. Now, the international business portfolio was previously under the Ministry of Health. It has now been transplanted to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the ministry intends to leverage its international diplomatic network to drive investment and business development through this portfolio. This international business unit is expected to coordinate Grenada's participation in international trade events, to monitor our ease of doing business rankings, and devise strategies to create international business partnerships as well as enhance business activity in the state of Grenada. Speaking of international trade events, Grenada will be participating in Expo 2020 next year. It's called Expo 2020 because it was supposed to have been held this year, but for obvious reasons, it has been postponed. It will be held in Dubai from October 2021 to March 2022. Mr. President, 15 million people are expected to visit Expo 2020. And this presents an excellent opportunity for Grenada to promote its investment opportunities, as well as goods and services in the manufacturing, tourism, and agricultural sectors. My dear Senator Sinclair, I don't know if the GCNA has already registered, but this is an excellent opportunity to introduce the world to the nutmeg cooler, which Senator Diallo is a big fan of and which we all sampled yesterday. So far, we have 25 local manufacturing companies registered to showcase and sell their products at this event. So, Senator Sinclair, through you, Mr. President, this is an opportunity. Yes, for the pepper sauce also. Our fifth and final strategic priority area is the implementation of a diaspora policy. With assistance received from the International Office of Migration, the ministry has concluded the Grenada National Diaspora Engagement Policy and Action Plan. This policy recognizes that the diaspora as an important actor in Grenada's development. And yesterday, Senator Noel mentioned remittances in a sort of pejorative manner. And I want to ensure, Senator, that remittances are nothing to be ashamed about. They play an important role in assisting members of our society. There's certainly nothing wrong with receiving gifts, financial and otherwise, from your families and friends overseas. Certainly nothing wrong with continuing to clear your barrels. But the ministry has recognized that the diaspora can be engaged in a more meaningful way than just sending barrels and money through Western Union. So therefore, the ministry plans to strengthen the engagement process along clearly defined areas, identifying education, philanthropy for social development, investment and human capital transfers as transformational sectors on which partnerships can be built with the diaspora. Therefore, in 2021, the ministry will be implementing the diaspora policy with the official launch of the Office of Diaspora Affairs. Mr. President, this concludes a summary of the strategic priority areas for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Of course, we are currently led by Minister Oliver Joseph, our new minister, and under his guidance, we will continue to do our part to further the collective vision of 2035. Our next ministry, Mr. President, is the Ministry of Social Development, Housing and Community Empowerment and Hospital Services, which I predict will take up the lion's share of my presentation, because this is a humongous ministry that does similarly, a humongous amount of work. And of course, this ministry is led by the Honorable Minister Delma Thomas, who we know that Senator Lewis is a huge fan of from his utterings yesterday. And I wish he was here to hear more about what this ministry has been doing and continue to do to help the people of Grenada, to assist the people of Grenada. Mr. President, the pandemic has compounded already existing social and economic challenges faced by our people. The Ministry of Social Development, aware of its key role in meeting these challenges, was thus compelled to expand its safety net and the suite of services offered to the public. And this is reflected in the significant increase in the budget allocation to the ministry to $60.2 million, representing an increase of 28.6%. And Mr. President, this is an example of the responsiveness of the government. And many people, well, not many people, but some in the public space have been uttering that this is not a budget that is centered on COVID. There's nothing special in this budget. But if closer attention was really paid to the figures, to the estimates, to the areas of improvement, it is clear that this is a budget that is in direct response to the challenge of COVID-19. The work done by the ministry in 2020 and the expectations for 2021 will be explored under the headings of the Psychosocial Unit, the Social Services Division, the SEED Program, Housing, Juvenile Justice, the Division of Gender and Family Affairs, and Child Protection Authority. Quite a lot to get through, Mr. President. So we begin with the Psychosocial Unit. The Psychosocial Unit was poised to respond to the psychological fallout from the pandemic, occasioned by job loss, the resulting economic hardship, and domestic disputes. And this is in keeping with the mission of the unit to improve the functioning of families through rehabilitative work and to assist individuals achieve positive mental health. My colleague, Senator Sincere and Senator Lewis, yesterday had expressed concern about the degree of work that is being done in this area, the degree of work that is being done to give support to persons who may be suffering mentally because of the repercussions of this pandemic. So they shall be pleased to know, Mr. President, that during the period January to October 2020, the unit was able to provide individual counseling to a total of 560 persons. 380 of those persons received support during the COVID lockdown period while in quarantine and in isolation facilities, Mr. President. 3 churches participated in psychoeducational sessions on coping skills and stress management, also during the lockdown period. Another 3 participated in educational sessions on mental health and coping. 5 workplaces, both private and public, benefited from psychosocial support during the period May to July 2020. And further, the unit provided services to 2 schools during the stated period. Mr. President, on nurses, or police officers, other first responders, or heroes on the front line, were also recipients of the unit's counseling services. And I must join with the other members of the House in applauding, lauding, and thanking our first responders for the work that they have done and continue to do in keeping our country safe. Mr. President, in addition to its COVID-specific response, the unit continued its crisis intervention in trauma-inducing situations. In particular, 4 families who lost their homes due to fire benefited from the unit services. 19 families received psychosocial assistance due to the sudden death of a member of the family as a result of suicide, murder, vehicular accidents, and other unfortunate incidences. Similarly, 3 workplaces received crisis intervention due to an employee's sudden death. Men, Mr. President, because of the traditional roles assigned to us, because of our traditional perceptions of what a man should be, and because of the role of the man as the leader of the home and the country, and all of the pressures that are put upon men to be leaders in general and to be strong in general, they often suffer silently. So men are usually reluctant to express that they are going through some mental hardships. They're suffering depression or having thoughts of harming themselves. And the ministry has recognized that. And therefore, in response to the mental health challenges faced by our men, especially our young men, the unit led a program called Man Box, which provides support to young males in targeted communities, covering topics such as depression, suicide, and positive coping mechanisms. This pilot program, I am pleased to announce, Mr. President, was a resounding success, and it will be replicated as a program under the Social Services Division. In 2021, Mr. President, the unit will continue to do the following: conduct debriefing sessions for individuals and families in times of crisis, provide individual, family, and group counseling at main and district offices, provide psychosocial support to residents at the Cedars home, provide psychosocial support to students at the program for adolescent mothers, conduct psychoeducational sessions with churches and other community groups, develop and disseminate via the media educational messages on various issues affecting the population, and conducting training sessions for all of the social development units. Mr. President, I now move on to the Social Services Unit. As a designated essential service provider, the Division of Social Services provided support specific to the COVID response, as well as its full range of social support programs, including family community interventions, burial assistance, fire victims assistance, and water assistance. Under this unit, Mr. President, the Desk of the Elderly continues to ensure that senior citizens receive direct services in geriatric homes. Probation officers continue to deliver exemplary services to the court and persons in conflict with the law. And the Early Childhood Unit continues to provide and promote excellent childhood stimulation for children up to the age of 3. Notably, Mr. President, for the period of January to October 2020, the division has assisted over 1,935 persons, Mr. President. And I will just give a brief breakdown of that number. Of that 1,935 persons, family and community intervention was given to 382 persons. Social inquiry reports were provided on behalf of 79 persons. Burial assistance was given to 97 persons. Fire victims assistance, 12 persons. There were approximately 827 walk-in clients, Mr. President. Child maintenance support, 146 persons. And the water assistance program, 190 persons. Mr. President, our colleague, Senator Bola, already mention the single-headed households program, which is a new program intended to support households with one parent, and an amount of $2 million was allocated to that program. I will again join my senator in commending the government for this initiative. Mr. President, SEED, the support for education, empowerment, and development. As the House is aware, this groundbreaking program provides monetary assistance to vulnerable members of a society, particularly our elderly and young people. This year, the allocation to this program is $18 million. Mr. Deputy President.
Deputy President, head the chair.
Yes. Representing an increase by $4 million. And I would just like to restate that, since there was a little intervention in the sentence. This year, Mr. President, the allocation to this program is $18 million, representing an increase by $4 million. And currently, the program is conducting its first recertification of beneficiary households. And through this recertification, there will be an assessment of the impact of the program on the recipients, as well as a determination of whether the current beneficiaries will continue to be beneficiaries. And yesterday, Senator Bola mentioned that we have to be careful not to inculcate a spirit of dependency. Now, SEED is a valuable program, and it is important to ensure that the program casts as wide a net as possible to cover as many vulnerable persons as possible. So it will not be productive to continue to provide this relief, this assistance to persons who have, in some instances, improved their station in life and are able to fend for themselves. So that is why this recertification process is essential, so that other people, other members of the public, especially those who have found themselves in less desirable positions because of COVID-19, are also able to benefit from the SEED program. A total of 918 households will form the first batch of beneficiaries to be reassessed, and the results of that reassessment will be communicated to the beneficiaries. Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, I would just like to mention here that a number of student beneficiaries of the SEED program have performed exceptionally well in school, in their exams, and the ministry extends its heartiest congratulations to those students and encourages them to continue to strive for excellence. Mr. Deputy President, housing. Housing continues to be a priority for this government. The goal is to enable our citizens to live comfortable lives based on established minimum standards. In pursuance of this goal, the government, in collaboration with the People's Republic of China, will soon commence the distribution of low-income housing. A total of 647 units are scheduled for distribution in the coming year. Further, the ministry continues to provide material and housing brigade building assistance to families. For the period January to October 2020, the ministry provided over 420 families with material assistance and over 83 families with housing brigade building assistance, which includes the construction of 38 new houses Mr. Deputy President. Crucial in improving the living conditions of our people and preserving their dignity is access to modern sanitary facilities. Hence, in June of this year, the ministry commenced the indoor bathroom and toilet construction program. This program spans the entire Tri-Island state, with implementation in every single constituency. And to date, the ministry has assisted over 409 families, Mr. Deputy President. My colleague, Senator Bola, also touched on the work that the Housing Authority of Grenada is doing. And this agency must be highlighted for their contribution to improving the housing stock in Grenada. Through the soft loan program, in the first year of 2020, the authority assisted 31 families with disbursements worth over $700,000. It was projected by the end of this year, by the end of this month, the Housing Authority would have assisted 60 families, totaling $1.5 million. Mr. Deputy President, juvenile justice. Our government continues to make significant strides to improve our juvenile justice system. With the support of the OACS and USAID, the ministry continues to build the capacity of those working in the juvenile justice system. And this they have done by providing ongoing training in the following areas: reintegration and treatment plans training. And this will support the reintegration of juveniles upon leaving the Bachelet Rehabilitation and Treatment Center. Trauma training to address the associated immediate post-traumatic experiences of juveniles. And juvenile assessment and intervention system training to support the risk assessment of juveniles. The ministry is also developing a mentorship program to provide guidance to at-risk youth. And this mentoring program, Mr. Deputy President, is expected to reduce recidivism or repeat offending. This project will be done in collaboration with the Juvenile Justice Reform Project, which has committed US $25,000 for the execution of this pilot program. The Grand Bachelet Juvenile Rehabilitation and Treatment Center continues to be an example in the Caribbean of an effective institution for juvenile justice. It provides rehabilitation services to young people in conflict with the law and those deemed in need of special care and protection. And one of the center's focus this year is on increasing the earning potential of its residents so that when they are reintegrated into society, they can contribute to society as productive members. In this regard, the center is currently focusing on crop production and poultry rearing, which is supported by the Ministry of Agriculture and the Caribbean agro-industries. And largely because of the programs of this center, its residents are showing great promise. An example of that is that a total of 5 residents at the center sat the CXC exams this year and obtained a total of 16 passes, Mr. Deputy President, in areas of mathematics, English language and literature, principles of business, office administration, and social services. In 2021, the focus at the center will be on the delivery of the hydroponics program, the expansion of the skills and academic programs, staff development, and the development of a strong non-residential program. Mr. Deputy President, I now move on to the Division of Gender and Family Affairs. And the ministry, through this division, is currently engaged in the preparatory process for the full implementation of the Spotlight Initiative project. The aim of this project is to eliminate violence against women and girls. And support for this project is being provided by the UN, the ILO, PAHO, and the WHO. A grant of €2 million has been allocated for the implementation of this project. The unit is also leading the implementation of the Engender project, and Engender stands for Enabling Gender-Responsive Disaster Recovery, Climate and Environmental Resilience in the Caribbean. And this project seeks to address some of the existing impediments to equal access to disaster risk reduction and climate change solutions for men and women, boys and girls. But the project, the Engender project, has made some adjustments to accommodate the COVID-19 response. And those adjustments include, 1, the disbursement of food hampers and food vouchers to survivors of intimate partner violence, which will be implemented through the Cedars Home. 2, agricultural grant support in the form of vouchers to the self-employed and persons engaged in agro-processing at the micro-business level. And 3, tourism grant support in the form of vouchers given to spice and market vendors and the producers of craft products. A grand total of $99,732 has been committed for these activities. And Mr. President, as it relates to gender-based violence, which continues to be an issue in Grenada, sadly, we have seen a marked increase in instances of gender-based violence, especially cases involving intimate partner violence. And this has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 lockdown period, where persons were forced to be in constant contact with each other. So unfortunately, as a result of that, the Women's Emergency Shelter is now filled to capacity, Mr. Deputy President. But notwithstanding this, government has made has put in place interim measures to assist the women who are at high risk. And Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, the government can do only so much. There needs to be a change in the culture, Mr. Deputy President. There needs to be a change in the way persons perceive each other and the way they interact with each other. There needs to be some responsibility taken at the family level. How we teach our children to respect others, how we teach our boys to respect women, how we teach our children to resolve conflict, not through physical means, but through words, reasoned words, because words are also a weapon, Mr. Deputy President. Resolving conflict through discussion. The government cannot do this, Mr. Deputy President. So there needs to be discussions at those levels, at the family level, at the school level, to teach our people how to treat each other. We cannot defeat gender-based violence at the government level. This is something for the people of Grenada to take on. We cannot keep filling our shelters to capacity with abused women and children. We cannot continue to abuse our young people, sexually and otherwise, Mr. President. The Gender-Based Violence Unit has been working tirelessly to continue to provide the range of client support that it has done during the years. But this is a challenge for all of us as a people. Relatedly, the Child Protection Authority has been doing its part to protect the children of Grenada. And part of doing that is ensuring that the authority has the widest reach possible. Therefore, there has been an expansion in counseling services. There has been an expansion in family support and court support, with increased access in Carriacou and Petite Martinique. To strengthen the authority's operations, it has developed a 5-year strategic plan, operations manual, and a comprehensive web-based case management plan. And Mr. Deputy President, that brings me to the end of what is a truncated account of the enormous number of undertakings of this ministry. This ministry is a colossal ministry, and it is impossible to express the value of their work. It is impossible to express the impact on the lives of the persons whose lives they have touched. Now, staunch capitalists may not agree with this, Mr. Deputy President. But the role of government is not just to provide the environment where business and enterprise and industry can grow. The role of government is to take care of its people also. And this is where this ministry plays an important role. Any country, no matter how big, no matter how powerful, if you cannot take care of your people, if you cannot provide them with basic social services, if you cannot do that as a country, you are a failed state. And in the state of Grenada, we are certainly not a failed state, because we have been doing the best that we can to provide essential social services to our people. In this regard, this ministry is a pillar of government, and we must continue to applaud them for their efforts. Mr. President, the final ministry, the Ministry of Legal Affairs, under the leadership of Minister Kyndra Mathurin Stewart. And in 2020, the ministry continued its quest to carry out government's legislative agenda in line with its national priorities and developmental goals. Now, in spite of the challenges faced by the ministry, in terms of limited resources, human and otherwise, the ministry has risen to the challenge this year to provide the legal framework to curb the spread of COVID-19 in Grenada. Thus, beginning late March, the ministry drafted a number of COVID-related laws and regulations, including the emergency powers regulations, the public health regulations, the quarantine regulations, the quarantine tests and time periods regulations, and just recently, the quarantine amendment bill. Further, the ministry worked to provide much-needed and timely economic reprieve to our citizens with the passage of a number of acts and statutory rules and orders, including the COVID Tax Relief Act, which occasioned a 3-month suspension of specific taxes. There was also the National Insurance Collection of Contributions Amendment Regulations, which gave a temporary reduction of the rates of contribution to the National Insurance Scheme, and the National Insurance Unemployment Assistance Benefit Regulations, which saw the temporary introduction of the unemployment benefit assistance. In total this year, Mr. Deputy President, there were 12 amending acts, 6 principal acts, and 24 statutory rules and orders enacted. And apart from those laws and regulations governing and regulating the fight against COVID-19, there were other significant legislation drafted by the Ministry of Legal Affairs, including the Consumer Protection Amendment Act 2020, the Predial Larceny Amendment Act 2020, which created a licensing regime for farmers and also increased the penalties for predial larceny. I know I see Senator St. Clair nodding his head, because I am sure that he would have been pleased with the passage of this act that helped to protect our farmers and the fruits of their labor. As for prospective legislation, Mr. Deputy President, the ministry is currently in the process of reviewing a draft national health insurance bill, and the ministry is holding consultations on the sexual offenders registers bill. Additionally, consultations are ongoing for proposed amendments to the Civil Code, the Criminal Code, and the Evidence Act, which aims to provide greater safeguards to victims of sexual offenses. Now, following expressions of concern over the COVID-19 bill, which did not make it to the House floor, the ministry has intensified its efforts to increase public engagement in the legislative process. Therefore, on the government website, there is an assigned page where legislation that have been passed and prospective bills will be made available to the public. The public, through this page, will also be able to make comments and ask questions concerning legislation. In addition to its legislative drafting responsibilities, the ministry gives considerable support to all other ministries of government through the negotiation, drafting, review, vetting of commercial agreements for government projects. It also deals with the day-to-day legal issues arising in the public service and the handling of the litigation portfolio of government. Over the past year, the ministry undertook several initiatives aimed at improving the overall operations of the ministry. Among them, the ministry has now moved to a fully functioning, secure e-office. And this, Mr. Deputy President, enables access to electronic data from any location, at any time, thus improving the speed of delivery of service. As it relates to administration of justice generally, efforts have been made towards improving efficiency in court administration. The recently passed Supreme Court Fees Act 2020 sanctioned the harmonization of fees throughout the region and laid the foundation for the implementation of the e-litigation platform. And once this platform is implemented, Mr. Deputy Speaker, payments of court fees and filing fees will be done online. Lawyers and clients will be able to access their court files online. This system will address numerous issues that the legal system currently faces. Issues with archiving, issues with the storage of documents, issues with the time to perform certain mundane functions, like the payments of fees. Mr. Deputy President, the events of 2020 has forced the reimagining of the way we do things, has forced the reimagining of the structure and functioning of our courts. Fortunately, the court office was quick to adjust to the restrictions in contact and movement with the implementation of a remote system which enabled the court to conduct virtual hearings since March 2020. However, Mr. Deputy President, applying virtual technology to jury trials has presented some challenges. An interim solution was to host these trials in large spaces to maintain social distancing, and through this method, over 10 trials have been conducted since August 2020. Notwithstanding this, the ministry, the registry, in collaboration with the Ministry of ICT, is currently exploring ways to eventually host virtual jury trials. Mr. President, in terms of physical infrastructure, recognizing that the registry compound was no longer adequate due to structural, health, environmental issues. In February of 2020, the ministry identified new accommodation to host the registry. And these accommodations were retrofitted by the Ministry of Works. Therefore, as of the 24th of March 2020, the registry was relocated to the J. McCormick Building on Church Street, St. George's. The registry is also the beneficiary of two initiatives launched in the last quarter of 2020 under the World Bank funded CARSIP project. The first project is the digitization of the records in the Deeds and Land Registry. And secondly, the data entry of digitized records for the Deeds and Land Registry into the existing database. Now, we have been hearing from our friends in the legal fraternity for years now the difficulty of finding records in the registry, especially deeds, having to go through mounds, piles of these huge books with deteriorating pages just to find records. So hopefully, Mr. Deputy President, the launch of these projects and the launch of the full e-registry will help in alleviating these issues. In 2020, Mr. Deputy President, the ministry plans to undertake the consolidation of the laws of Grenada. Currently, our laws have been consolidated up to 2010. So it has been 10 years since we've had a consolidation of laws. And this has posed a great difficulty in trying to get a concise picture of a particular law. And I know Mr. Deputy President will identify with this when it comes to the CBI laws and regulations. So many amendments have been made over the years, and it has been difficult to track the progression and change in the laws with so many different documents to refer to. So the ministry plans to undertake the consolidation of the laws of Grenada in 2021, and I know that this will be welcomed in all sectors of the country. Mr. President, in conclusion, under the Ministry of Legal Affairs, in 2021, the ministry will continue to build on its improvements in its operations. It intends to increase its human resource pool and introduce new strategies to meet the changing needs of the legal system. Mr. Deputy President, I have concluded much quicker than I anticipated. So as I close, oh yes, of course I will yield my remaining time to our leader of government business. Mr. President, as I close, Mr. Deputy President, it will be remiss of me not to acknowledge the work of the Minister and Ministry of Finance in preparing these estimates, and in general, managing our finances, ensuring that we remain fiscally prudent as a nation. So we sincerely thank the ministry, under its new leadership, of course, for its continued diligence. Mr. President, Deputy President, the writer Eckhart Tolle said, and I quote, "When faced with a radical crisis, when the old way of being in the world, of interacting with each other, doesn't work anymore, when survival is threatened by seemingly insurmountable problems, an individual life form will either become extinct or rise above the limitations of its condition through an evolutionary leap." Mr. Deputy President, extinction is not an option. This crisis presents a grand opportunity for us to take an evolutionary leap, to re-examine our crisis response mechanisms, our public health infrastructure, or social safety nets, or approaches to travel and the configuration of our economy. Mr. President, Deputy, we shall not let this opportunity go to waste. This budget and its theme, recovery, transformation, resilience, is an indication of that. And it is my hope, just on time, it is my hope, Mr. Deputy President, that our nation can embrace this opportunity, can embrace this vision collectively as we strive to build, and in this instance, rebuild our beloved country. Thank you, Mr. Deputy President.
Thank you, Senator Williams. Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. Mr. Deputy President, in wrapping up these last 3 days of debate, I just wish to start by thanking my colleagues on both sides for their significant contribution to this debate. And it comes at a sitting where we have 4 new senators who I think all have done themselves proud in terms of their maiden Senate budget presentations, maybe with the exception of Senator Bowler. He is new to us on this round, but he's certainly not new to the parliamentary discourse. And his contribution certainly demonstrated his vast experience, maturity, knowledge, not just of what is happening on the ground, what's happening in the country, but experience he can draw from his time in government. So I wish to thank him for his contribution. But of the 3 newer senators, I wish to single out Senator Cadet and Senator Williams for their contributions. I have seen and had the privilege, as we all have, to see them grow and develop. And the quality of their presentations over these last couple of days makes me personally proud, and I wish to acknowledge their contribution and their continued growth. Senator Cadet, I feel particularly attached to, as I was part of that process in terms of your selection from here, and all of us who are involved in that decision-making process. As I said, you've done us proud. And for Senators Noel and Sincere, their contributions, I think they have an appreciation of the significant amount of work that goes into preparing for the budget debate, and commend them for their contributions. And I am hopeful that with time, and based on the performance of the senators on this side, they too will grow as their time and their career in this chamber evolves. So once again, I thank all members for their contribution. Mr. Deputy President, as a general comment, I want to reiterate the statement that I made in my opening presentation, and that is, we are living and operating in extraordinary times. What we are seeing and the challenges that we are facing, challenges that the global community has not experienced in the last century. It sets a context for the budget that is before us, and it will set the context to my comments as I wrap up. And the key message is that this is a period where it is not business as usual. Couldn't be further away from that. So just referencing the state of play with COVID and this recent spike and the increase in the infection rates and the cluster that we are seeing, it is of significant concern to us as government, to us as a nation, but it's also important to put what is happening into context. We have stated all along, as successful as we have been up to this point in managing the pandemic, we've always stated there is significant risk and the need for individual and collective responsibility. Mr. President, firstly, I wish to say that all that can be done in terms of tracing, testing, isolation, the three key pillars to managing this virus, all that can be done is being done. And the Ministry of Health and all of the frontline workers are working around the clock to manage the challenges that, the extreme challenges that are faced. But again, in terms of setting the context to this, as things stand today, there are 85 cases recorded for Grenada. Significant increase than what it was last week, but 85 cases and 0 deaths. That number is likely to rise as more results with the testing come back. But to put that number into perspective, and this is not a competition, this is not about checking one country to another. Every infection that we experience here, everywhere, is one infection too much. But as things stand today, with this spike, St. Kitts is the only Caribbean country with a lower case rate than us at the moment, at 28. So Grenada stands at 85 with no death. That number will go up. Dominica currently stands at 88. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 98. Antigua, 148. St. Lucia is 278, 4 deaths. Barbados, 301, 7 deaths. So we are all in the same boat with this. We're all trying to do the same things. But as we balance that very, very difficult balance between lives and livelihoods, those risks, those threats are always there. And I, again, want to give credit to all of our frontline workers who are doing all they can to ensure that we are here as safe as possible. The Ministry of Health, the COVID committee, our healthcare workers. And as I said, the teams are working around the clock. With regard to this cluster and this spike, investigations are still taking place to identify the breach in the protocol. And with those ongoing investigations, it's too early to say exactly where that, well, to comment on precisely where that breach occurred. But investigations are taking place, and we've made it very clear that once that breach has been identified, the necessary action, all necessary remedial action, appropriate action, will be taken. However, Mr. Deputy President, I am a little disturbed in hearing of an unsubstantiated statement by a particular media house that a visitor who allegedly tested positive on 2 occasions before departing for Grenada was allowed entry into Grenada. Mr. Deputy President, this statement has serious, serious implications. It implies that the airline, because the airline that is the first port of call, the first barrier in the protocols, was complicit in some way, breaking their own regulations, their own rules in terms of protecting the safety of the passengers on those flights. And this reckless statement implies that the airline was complicit in some way in terms of breaching that protocol. The news report is libelous, and government is considering taking steps in terms of legal action, because statements such as that are unnecessary, reckless, agenda-driven, especially at this time. And I simply want to reiterate government's protocols, and the position that is taken is that the requirement is for a negative PCR test to be presented 72 hours prior, or to be taken 72 hours prior to travel, and then on arrival in Grenada to be quarantined with another PCR test within 4 days, and only once a negative result is acquired that that person can enter the community. Mr. Deputy President, and I'm glad Senator Lewis has returned, I was troubled by his statement that the Prime Minister in his national address was blaming the population, the general population, for what has occurred. So I took time to reread the Prime Minister's national address, and I could see no such statement. I mean, the statements that were made was about the real and serious threat of COVID, and that how we as a population have to adapt to these new circumstances. And with regard to the threat, that it underscored the need to constantly adhere to the recommended protocols, and that deviations from those protocols put us at risk. His advice, Mr. Deputy President, was for us not to drop our guard, and that immediate steps were being taken to address the situation. Also went on to state there is an obvious breakdown in the protocols of the hotel's application of the protocols, and that the precise nature of that breakdown is still to be determined. But government's commitment in enforcing the laws where breaches had been determined. And as I said, these investigations are ongoing. There are no formal conclusions as yet. There was a call for the public and business community to work together with government in partnership, that it was a collective responsibility and we need to work together. And then a general call with the holiday period in order for us all to demonstrate restraint and responsibility. Mr. Deputy President, the Prime Minister expressed his concerns about safety and the threat, his empathy for the individuals involved, the families involved. And again, that need for individual and collective responsibility. But Mr. Deputy President, nowhere in that statement was there blame apportioned. And I simply want to going through this, it's important, Mr. Deputy President, that the record is set straight on this matter. So, Mr. Deputy President, just going through some of the comments that, with regard to the budget, that some common messages, common comments that were generated. And I will go through, I've kind of grouped them together rather than going through each person individually. But there was a comment by members of the opposition that there is nothing different about this budget. And I think, Mr. Deputy President, sometimes we think if we keep repeating the same message over and over, it becomes fact, it becomes truth. But, Mr. Deputy President, this budget is a very, very different budget to previous budgets. Firstly, the environment in which this budget has been developed, been produced, is fundamentally different to any environment we have had to budget for, even beyond the likes of Hurricanes Ivan, the period of Ivan and Emily. The global crisis, the threat to health and life, global economic meltdown, those markets that we're so dependent on that provide the foundation for our own economic development are struggling. And we're seeing challenges that the world has never faced in 100 years, where revenues, government revenues, have fallen by half, and we're being called upon to do much more with so much less. Where we're having to support those who have been worst impacted by the crisis, where global travel and tourism is in suspension still, where workers have been sent home, we're now seeing some of that recovery, but we're seeing workers sent home, hotels, bars, restaurants, venues, vendors, taxi drivers, water taxi operators, dive operators, farmers, fishers, hairdressers, barbers, small retailers, tradespersons, all seriously impacted by the economic challenges that we're facing in managing this pandemic. But with significant support, drawing on government resources in order to support all of these worker groups. The $50 million that's provided in payroll support, income support, support for our small hoteliers, our small businesses, the provision of unemployment benefit for the most vulnerable. All of those support services that are being provided at this time and will continue to be offered as and when necessary. We do not know when this crisis will end. The tens of millions of dollars that have been expended in preparing our schools for reopening, the safe reopening of our schools, the tens of millions of dollars in protective personal equipment, essential medical equipment for the isolation was a strengthening of our healthcare system. The millions that's been expended in PCR testing, the tracers, the wardens, all of those frontline staff that have been bolstered to keep us safe, Mr. Deputy President. The financial burden the government has been called upon to provide, the significant financial burden it will continue to in the upcoming period is significant. And we will meet those demands as and when presented in order to keep our nation safe and to protect livelihoods where we can. So, Mr. President, we have presented a budget that takes into account dealing with the current crisis, but a budget that is focused on capital expenditure. A budgetary allocation for capital expenditure of $305 million, the largest capital budget in Grenada's history, of which a significant portion, 46%, is allocated to the public sector investment program. Government recognizes, and this is a model, this is not just us guessing, this is a model that is being used the world over, that investment in our productive sectors, investment in the construction sector, is the fastest way to recovery. It is the fastest way of re-stimulating the economy. It is the fastest way of creating more and more jobs that are so needed at this given time. This is fact, Mr. Deputy President, not guesswork. This focus creates immediate demand for labor, immediate demand for goods and services. As construction workers receive their salaries, their wages, that money is immediately put back into the local communities, whether it's at the local grocery stores, local businesses, go straight back into the economy. Whether it is the call for, as I said, goods and services, materials, building materials, the duties that are generated by that, the revenues that are generated by that, that again go back into the economy. The indirect benefits, other retailers, other wholesalers, vendors servicing those work sites. The trickle-down effect in investing and activity in the construction sector is significant. But in addition to that, these projects have high value. These projects all speak to our national development. It speaks to the development of our road networks, maintenance of our roads, the upgrading, construction of new schools, government buildings, investment in the water sector, investment in the sewage sector, in waste management, in agriculture, in tourism, in the digital economy, in healthcare, in housing. These are all activities that speak to the needs of our people and that drive to develop our nation. So you have an increase in that capital budget that will directly stimulate the recovery of the economy. But then on the other side of that is a reduction on the recurrent side, a reduction in discretionary spending, in waste management, to keep the operations, the cost of running government as low as possible, so that those savings can be taken to plough into the capital budget. But Mr. Deputy President, it's not all about, and the budget is not all about public spending. It also speaks to the creation of the enabling environment for private sector investment, which is a significant part of what is going to drive our economy and our recovery. A pipeline of $6 billion worth of projects. And these aren't pie in the sky. Many of those projects within that pipeline are either in the process of being completed, work in progress, or work about to start. Grenada is embarking on a construction boom, if you like, both on the public side and on the private side. And again, in areas that speak to our productive sectors and our national development. The tourism sector, billions of dollars are being invested in new hotels and resorts, which will provide opportunities, significant opportunities during the initial construction phase, and as I said, contributes to the recovery of the economy, but also permanent quality jobs when those hotels come on stream. And Mr. Deputy President, what is incredible about this, in addition to focusing on the productive sectors, creating the enabling environment for those who can produce, we're also seeing increases of investment in our youth, in youth development, and also our social safety nets to protect our most vulnerable. Mr. Deputy President, what is being presented before us is not business as usual. It is fundamentally different to anything that's been presented as a budget before. And Mr. Deputy President, this then brings me to another statement that was made. Well, there are two things now. The first is there's nothing transformational about what is being done. And Senator Noel had presented us with a concept of an alternative budget and his warnings of us going back to those dark and desperate days prior to 2013. So on the transformation side, Mr. Deputy President, you've heard throughout the presentations from this side the focus on and taken advantage of the opportunity that COVID has presented to us in terms of digitization. So whether it's in education and the incredible transformation that's taken place in terms of how we teach our secondary school students, the move to this e-learning platform that focuses on devices, connectivity, content, training, the entire package. 20,000 students, 1,700 teachers, Mr. Deputy President. This last 6-month period, this transition to this e-learning platform, bringing our education system into the digital age. That is transformation, Mr. Deputy President, and benefits will be felt for generations to come. Whether it is Senator Williams spoke about the electronic registry and how that is transforming the legal system, the court hearings that have been heard virtually, the improvement in efficiency, in our legal system, whether it is digital governance, whether it's through the CARSIP program, all of these technologies, the embracing of technologies in different sectors is absolutely significant. This digital agenda, there is work going on right now with UNDP, who have just done an inventory of all of the digitization projects taking place across the country within government. That number stands at 59 projects. They're developing a vision and a strategy, identifying opportunities, further opportunities within that, gaps within that, how we can fill those gaps. This is transformation, Mr. President. Scholarships, education, training. Since we came into office in 2013, 1,600 scholarships at degree levels and above have been afforded to our young men and women, Mr. President. Never before in our history have so many scholarships been awarded in areas that again speak to our national development. So that's on the academic side. Over that same period, 5,000 CVQ, NVQ certificates have been issued. So for those students who may not be academically inclined, more vocationally inclined, are being trained, being developed with the skills that meet and align with the opportunities that are being created, whether that's in the construction industry, whether that's in the tourism sector, in agriculture, in agro-processing, in other areas, Mr. Deputy President. So in terms of building capacity within our young men and women, transformation is happening. Investment in our youth and their skill development, whether it's the Youth Biz program in terms of training our young entrepreneurs, whether it's the Empower program, taking disenfranchised young men and providing them with hope and opportunities, whether it's the New Imani program and the transition to permanent quality work, Mr. Deputy President, this is transformation. Whether it's in building resilience, whether it's in our water sector, the GCF-funded G-Cruise project, which is the single largest investment in our water sector in history, building that resilience, whether it's the Climate Smart Cities program, this is transformation, Mr. Deputy President. Whether it's in agriculture, Climate Smart Agriculture program, these are transformative programs, Mr. President. Our hotel sector, billions and billions of dollars being pumped into our hotel sector, creating 1,600 new hotel rooms over this next period, almost doubling the number of rooms that we have in this country. This is transformation, Mr. President, and providing resort developments, not just in the south, but up in the north of the country, in Levra, in La Sagesse. We've talked for generations about decentralizing our tourism product. It is happening now, Mr. President. In our agro-processing area, there was a comment, nothing is happening. We have 2 new investments, major investments in the poultry sector. We constantly talk about a high export bill. Poultry alone is over $35 million per year in imported, often poor quality chicken. Grenada has the crown of, I think, one of the highest per capita consumers of chicken. 2 new producers, together with the existing producer, will reduce our poultry food import bill by over a third, Mr. President. Again, this is transformation. Our self-sufficiency in terms of egg production. We no longer have to import eggs out of the US. We can produce our own. The poultry policy that's taken so much time to put in place is starting to work. Whether it's Renegade Rum, Caneco, a $150 million project, revitalizing a sector, not just in terms of agricultural production, but also the value add in terms of the rum production. World-class rum, Mr. President. That is transformation. In healthcare, continued work, and these are difficult financial times, but the ongoing work with National Health Insurance, which will provide a more sustainable means of financing our healthcare system moving forward. This is transformation, Mr. President. Sports. I heard Senator Noel speak about we need to be doing more in sports. We now have 2 stadia, 2 world-class stadia, a cricket stadium and an athletic stadium. We now have 2 programs for 2 new swimming pools, one of which will be an Olympic-sized swimming pool. We are developing world-class athletes. Our athletes are performing at the highest levels, in a major part because of the facilities we're able to provide, and the future sporting stars. I read that we actually have a number of international athletes who have come to Grenada to train in our facilities, one, because we're relatively safe in this COVID period, but the facilities that we're able to offer is able to attract international athletes to train. This is transformation, Mr. President. The list goes on. Small business development. With a small business development fund, over 800 small businesses have been positively impacted by the support that government has provided. Again, are young men and women who have an idea, who want to develop those ideas, and we're giving them the opportunity. 800 businesses positively affected. That is transformation, Mr. President. So when I hear these comments that this is untransformational, this is just about concrete, what is before us is far deeper than that, far much more than that. And then I want to touch on, Senator Noll, I don't want to pick on you, but I'm going to pick on you. You presented an alternative budget, and I've heard this alternative budget being discussed in the other place. So what I've presented is the rationale, the thinking of the approach that this new National Party administration has taken to the recovery, resilience building, and transformation of this nature. The alternative budget that was put forward, and it's good, and I encourage all members. It's not just a case of talking about problems. Come up with some solutions, offer some ideas. As Senator Noll, you suggested the alternative budget. We must cut taxes. We shouldn't collect taxes. We shouldn't borrow. We should increase salaries. We should spend more on roads, on sports, on health. Spend more, spend more, spend more. Mr. President, I struggle then. Each individual line item, it sounds sexy. Cut taxes. Don't collect taxes. Don't borrow. The only avenues a government has to generate revenue in order to serve the nation, to serve the needs of its people, is through taxation. Revenue generation through taxation, whether that's corporation tax, income tax, VAT, property tax. That's how countries the world over. Beyond that, it is then to borrow taxes. If the revenues that are being generated are insufficient, then you must borrow. But if you're saying we can't collect and we can't borrow, how? How are we going to meet this shopping list of requirements? Senator Noll went on to then say, he warned us, and he went into great detail, and he was preaching to the converted. We should not go back to that period prior to 2013, where we were in another economic crisis, where there was another government in place, another government who were given the opportunity to demonstrate how they can do things differently. And we, Papa, did they? Absolutely showed us how differently they can do it. Record high unemployment, 40%. Public workers, we're talking now about, we're getting into this tussle. It's a wonderful conversation to actually have, Mr. President, about salary increases. At that time, public workers weren't getting paid. And the only way they could get paid, and paid late, was by selling assets. Unpaid claims, all of our businesses on their knees. Government couldn't pay its way, couldn't pay its workers, couldn't pay for the goods and services it was receiving. We had an economy that was in extreme recession. I looked up the numbers. There was a deficit, because we've gotten used now since 2013 about deficits. And what's been presented, we've gotten used to talking about surpluses since 2013. The budget before us has a budget deficit of $18.2 million. That's in the entirety of a budget valued at $1.2 billion. During that period, 2008 to 2013, the monthly deficit was $18 million, Mr. Deputy President, and no means of financing it. A finance minister who, when presenting his, and the country's, the boast was it was the country's first $1 billion budget, with a $600 million financing gap. When he was asked, how are you going to fill that? And our documentation shows exactly. And when we come on to the loan authorization bill, we'll talk about the 18 million. But when he was asked, how is he going to fill this $600 million financing gap? What did he say? Trust me. Trust me. So, Senator Noel, no, we don't want to go back there. And this is the administration since 2013 who has grabbed the issues by its bootstraps, dragged it out of that deep and dark hole to a place where we've gotten used to surpluses, growth, job creation, all of those things. And a government that's responsible enough to put laws in place, to put the necessary measures in place to protect those gains. So when I hear we don't want to go back there, absolutely not. This is the government, this is the administration who understands that and understands how to move us forward. But when I hear, Mr. President, cut taxes, don't collect taxes, don't borrow, spend more, we'll be going backwards. So that is not, that alternative budget is certainly not the direction that the budget before us is taking us. Mr. President, I now wish to move on. Senator Lewis, the issue of government's request for the deferral of the 4% pay increase to public servants for 2021, valued at in excess of $13 million. Mr. President, through you, at a time where 14,000 workers have lost their jobs in this global crisis period, where government is doing all it can, mustering resources to provide income support, payroll support, unemployment benefits for many of those workers. When there is a need for us to reduce our current spending so that we can take those savings to put on the capital side in order to grow the economy and protect and create more jobs. So, Mr. President, what government is asking for is recognizing that this is a negotiated, this is a signed agreement. We're not asking workers to forego. We're simply asking for the deferral of that increase to a time where those resources are available and it's a responsible time to pay. And it's not to say that public workers are undeserving of that. It's just at this time, a time where we have to come together, work together. Senator Diali outlined perfectly well the risks that we face and the need for, and that labor climate to have employer and employee in sync in order to preserve jobs, let alone create more. Mr. President, we must also consider those without voices, unorganized labor. Many of those 14,000 workers who are now without jobs. Liat workers, ASG, hotel workers, Sandals, with what is going on there. There may be a need for workers. There is insecurity there, Mr. President. All of the small business owners. Mr. President, it is only fair. It is only just. We have a moral responsibility, certainly as government, to take care of all workers, not just organized labor, but all workers, all vulnerable people. Mr. President, it's also important to note that government has provided significant support to public workers in this last period. I think to date, something like $140 million since 2013, $150 million. That is the PSIP, Public Sector Investment Program budget, roughly. $140 million has been expended in salary increases, back pay increments, one-off payment. We negotiated 2020, 2021, 2022, 12% increase in salaries. Agreed. But as I said, Mr. President, when you have 14,000 workers without work, we need to do all we can. And this is where the call from Senator Diali, the call from government, is that we must work together and find a way taking care of our public sector workers. We're doing that. We've demonstrated that. But now we need a little cooperation from public workers, from the labor movement, to buy us some time so that we can help others who need that help even more, Mr. President. So I simply reiterate the call of government, and for the member on the other side to seriously consider the request that government has made for the sake and the benefit of those tens of thousands of other workers out there who aren't as fortunate and aren't in such a fortunate position as public workers are now. Let us be our brother's keeper, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'll now move on to Senator Sinclair and agriculture, fisheries. And I think that the discourse, it was actually a pleasure, both listening to your presentation, but listening to Senator Bowler's also. And the first thing is, I think Senator Bowler covered off many of the detailed ideas and suggestions, and your wealth of suggestions, and not just coming up with the problems, but solutions also. So that was encouraging. So I won't repeat that. But my positive takeaway from the debate that took place is that we're in a good place to have a real conversation now about the development of our agricultural sector. We have you, Senator Sinclair, in a privileged position representing farmers and fishers here in the Senate. Your position at the GCNA and your vision for propelling the GCNA into the 21st century. Your experience in your time at MNIB, all of your career has been spent in this area. Minister Bowler, former Minister of Agriculture, but still sharp, knows his stuff, still passionate about what's taking place. We have a new Minister of Agriculture, Minister David, again, hitting this hard, passion, real vision. The former Minister, Minister Bain Horsford, again, she did a phenomenal job in her time in bringing everybody together. And I think we're at a crossroads, Mr. President, where we can have some real conversations with partners who want to see the sector progress, with the experience, with the knowledge. We heard some of the insights that Minister Bowler shared of some of the obstacles within the ministry. And Senator Sinclair, you know them too. Obstacles within the GCNA, you know the obstacles. Within MNIB, this call for the refocusing, and Senator Diali gave, as chairman, gave a very, very good assessment of the financial challenges, have the short-term financial challenges, there are some solutions, but the understanding that there are structural inadequacies, that need for refocusing so that the marketing board can fulfill that vision of the founding fathers and can adequately, not adequate, adequate is a terrible word, can successfully address the potential of our farming sector. And we have that opportunity. But what it requires is some bold decisions now. And this is where leadership comes in. And leadership, I think, should be a theme through all that is being done, everything that's associated with the budget that is before us, leadership. And within the agricultural sector, real leadership is required. There needs to be a cultural shift. How we look at our agriculture needs to be looked at. The world has changed. Our commodity boards, the world is a very different place to how it was 70-odd years ago when that original ordinance was presented. It's no longer fit for purpose. It no longer serves the needs of our farmers. It's doing them a disservice. It does not fulfill the potential that Grenada has as an agricultural producer, first and foremost for its own food security. There's one priority, should be food security, and if it's one thing that we should have learned from this pandemic, is the need for food security. So that's number one. And then where we have a comparative advantage to be able to exploit the export market, cocoa, finest in the world, nutmeg, finest in the world, soursop, finest in the world. We have secured access to exclusive markets. How can we exploit that? We have the man in the seat. We have a man in the seat. We have another man and another woman still in the, effectively. You have a government. Have a government with the ambition, with the vision to turn this thing around. But it requires, and the call from Senator Bowler was, we all need to put our shoulders to the wheel. So, Senator Sinclair, you're going to be tested. And we'll see how you draw on, you come from the bowels of this, what effluent you need to leave behind, and what we need to do to push forward. So I was encouraged, seriously encouraged by the conversation, but it's for us now to not just talk about it, but we have the opportunity to do it. And I just wanted to, this debate, ongoing debate, tourism and agriculture. I mean, I spent time in tourism, back in tourism. I spent time in agriculture. And this debate, I always find, it frustrates me it's a non-argument. Both go hand in hand. Both are of equal importance. Both benefit off the other. And when I look at, totaled up the number of new rooms, so current hotel stock is about 2,400 rooms. Just with the projects that are carded to be delivered to come on stream within this next period, that's the addition of another 1,600 rooms. Every developer, one of the first conversations that takes place after agreeing the technical elements of that development is a conversation about the acquisition of locally produced agricultural produce. All of the investors, all of the hotels want to locally source. And that's the way the world has gone, farm to table. It's about local production. A premium will be paid for that. And the hotels and the additional room stock that is coming on stream with developers who want to actively encourage our local farmers and fishers to supply. It's a massive opportunity. And again, that opportunity is for us to deliver on. So the market is there. The market is right on our doorstep. The attitude, the openness of those developers is there. So it's for us to deliver on that. Mr. President, I'll now move on to the remarks from Senator Dialli. And as ever, his analysis is deep. His analysis is very, very balanced. First of all, the CBI program. Never before has the significance of the CBI program been there for us all to see. And I know we've had some very heated discussions in this chamber, in this session and the previous parliamentary session, where members were constantly trying to undermine the value and the significance of that program. Where Grenada still holds that accolade of being the gold standard for CBI programs, where the due diligence and the care that goes into the selection of investors and programs is of the highest level. And is considered to be one of the best within the region. But what is telling is in this period, and we look at the financing for the 2021 budget, $172 million will be derived from the CBI program. And this isn't just about forecasts. We're guessing how many we're going to get and praying and hoping. A significant portion of those funds are already held, already deposited, based on CBI revenues already. So this is concrete, real concrete financing sources. So the significance of that program and how we should be able to continue to build on that, maintaining that gold standard, is even more important now than it ever has been. We heard the comments about MNIB and some of the positives within MNIB. So the need for fundamental rethinking and restructuring of that organization. But there are positives, whether it's HACCP certification, access, and this is what is critical. And this is one of the core functions of the MNIB. It's ensuring access to external markets. And the HACCP certification isn't something to be to take lightly. It provides significant access, why we're able to export our soursop to the US. And then the contracts with 200 farmers. Again, that's not insignificant, but the need for that model to change. Then the comment about risk from Senator Dialli, risk to the budget and risk to the 6% growth. I think Senator Williams did a phenomenal job in explaining where that 6% comes from. And that because we have experienced a significant level of economic contraction, negative growth of minus 12.2%. So it's not 6% on top of growth on top of growth. There's a trough. We're coming from a very, very low point, the lowest point we have been in recent times. So the starting point is low. So that 6% growth is still well below where we were in 2019, 2018, 2017. We've gone back years, Mr. President. And what we will see with the risks, which I'll speak to in a minute, but what we are seeing is an immediate rebound. We saw it after Ivan, after Emily, where once those risks are managed, a significant increase in demand and activity, which will show that spike. And then as Senator Dialli then showed, 2022, you see a leveling off again. So I think what is being presented is realistic, but those risks that Senator Dialli outlined, implementation, we can't shy away from that. We have a history of low implementation rates, significantly better than the previous administration when we came into office in 2013, significantly better, but still with deficiencies, which is why millions of dollars have been plowed into the Division of Implementation. Senator Cox went into great detail as to some of those actions, whether it's new engineers, project managers, management team. Every effort has been expended to minimize that implementation deficit risk. It's a risk we recognize, but the measures, positive measures are being put in place to address that. So that, to some degree, is within our control. The risk in the numbers that is outside of our control is the pandemic. Our local management, global management. And we still see in the US, UK, across Europe, Mr. President, we'll see in those great countries struggling, still on their knees. We're trying to figure out how we're going to manage ourselves over the Christmas period. My son just left to go to the UK to spend time with his family there. It's a miserable time he's going to have. Miserable. On lockdown. On complete lockdown. They're struggling to maintain and to control things from a health perspective, and their economy is struggling. So, Mr. President, it comes back to our ability to manage those things that are within our control. And some of the risks that we're trying to manage are within our direct control. And going back to the comments previously made, it speaks to a collective responsibility. Once we all do what we are supposed to do, we stand the best chance of getting through this at the least cost. So, Mr. President, in concluding, I'll conclude as I started, these are extraordinarily challenging times, and we're faced with threat and risks as never before, health-wise and economically. What we're facing is unprecedented, but the budget that is before this honorable House speaks to keeping our nation safe. It speaks to re-stimulating and accelerating economic growth. It speaks to getting our people back to work, whether it's those out of work, whether it's those who are newly entering the workforce. It does build resilience, and it is transformational. It is getting us on that transformation path. Mr. President, this budget is also presented in the knowledge that this new National Party administration has a track record of delivering in difficult times. Whether that was Ivan, Emily, the financial crash, or COVID-19, we delivered then, Mr. President, and we will deliver once again now. And it's for those reasons, Mr. President, that I commend this motion to this honourable House.
Thank you, Senator Steele. Honourable members, the question is that the bill be read a second time. Honourable members, the question is... Oh, sorry. Honourable members, the question is that the motion be approved. The bills will come later. The question is that the motion be approved. All those who in that line of thought, all those who support the approval of the motion, say aye. Aye. To the contrary view, say nay. I think the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. I'm going to take the lunch. Yes. Honourable members, I think it is opportune to take the recess for lunch. During that time between the recess and the recommencement, I would summon a brief meeting with the Standing Orders Committee, because there's a matter that we need to discuss. It's now 12:31, and I was contemplating that we be back here at 1:30 for us to address the bills and the motions, and then wrap up by about 4, I would think. Senator Steele? I think that order of time and allocation seems to be realistic. Considering that I wish to convene as chair of the Standing Orders Committee, a brief meeting of the committee, I would therefore suggest that we resume not at 1:30, but at 2 o'clock. So it's a little bit extended. The members of the committee, Senators Cox and Senator Sincere, we can meet in my office. You can give me an indication whether you wish to have your lunch now and then we meet, or we wish to meet and then have lunch. A simple nod of either of the heads can tell me which direction I need to do. In any event, this session now stands adjourned until 2 o'clock.